Chapter 12:28. After the void essence mysterious cave swallowed everything on the jade cliff, it turned into a mysterious chi bead. Because there was no one controlling it, it fell from the sky. Sect leader Qin was standing below. He summoned the bead with his mind and held it in his hand. After taking a look at it, he put it into his sleeve. Yu Xianxiao looked up at the sky and saw that it had returned to a clear blue sky. He sighed and said, "The aura of the spirit cliff has been cut off. The 2 continents have collapsed. The entire sect should have been destroyed here." However, Sage Zhang didn't come out. Liang Xuanyi looked over. He also wanted to know the answer. Just now, when he saw the power that seemed to have swallowed everything, he didn't believe that there was anyone who could survive such a calamity. Sect leader Qin's expression was normal. He said, "It's fine. Hall Master Du Zhen has a way to escape. He will come back in a while. I will just wait for him for a while." In a cave dwelling in the 9 continents, the demon treasury stood quietly. Zhang Yan's avatar was sitting there. The 9 intimidation demon vanquishing slip was hanging at the side, shining slightly. This place was the place where he reached the 6th revolution of strength. Before he went to the Jade Cliff, he had placed his avatar and all his treasures here. However, it wasn't to protect his avatar, but for something else. He opened his palm. There was a drop of blood on it. It was the size of a thumb. It looked thick and heavy like mercury. Its surface was shiny and smooth, as if it could reflect everything. At this moment, it was like a living thing, slowly rolling around. Looking at it for a moment, he saw a mysterious light explode from the blood pearl, instantly wrapping around him. His entire person looked like amber glass. After 100 breaths of time, the light dissipated, and the strength path body returned to its original state. He clenched his fist. Not only did the demon treasury shake, even the cave dwelling outside shook. A few cracks appeared on the ceiling. Gravel rustled and fell. He thought to himself, this flesh reconstruction technique is indeed useful. However, it also consumed a lot of my vitality. If I want to recover to my peak, I will need at least 10 years of effort. Flesh reconstruction technique was one of the primordial divine abilities after the 6th revolution of strength path. Even if only a drop of blood essence or a severed limb remained, as long as one had enough essence chi, one could recover their entire body. There was no need to cultivate this technique. Once one entered this realm, they would naturally obtain it. In fact, the ancient heaven demons also had such abilities. For example, the demon locust had the life substitution and revival arts, which were their innate divine abilities. Apart from the origin divine ability. After reaching this realm, there were still many powerful techniques that required one to settle down and cultivate bitterly in order to succeed. If it wasn't for the fact that the situation was critical and he really couldn't delay any longer, and that he hadn't familiarized himself with the various divine abilities, this battle would have been much easier. For example, there was a divine ability called Eye of the Sun and Moon. As long as the opponent was within the range of his gaze, he could freeze them for an instant. If he was proficient in this Dao, then Master Lingya's escape technique would be useless. Before it was perfect, it could be broken. He packed up his belongings and stood up. When he was outside, he put away the devil trove and strolled out of the cave. Outside the room, he saw the huge figure of the black tortoise lying outside. This divine beast was a bit of its spirit from beyond the heavens. Its body was originally an external object. As long as the person who helped it to enter the world didn't die, life and death didn't matter. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. He floated and stepped on its back, looking around. With the defeat of Yu Xiao's side, all the profound techniques had already dissipated, and the water of the 4 seas had also returned to its original place. However, after this battle, the 9 continents were destroyed everywhere. The 3 western continents almost fell apart, turning into countless broken islands. The Dongxing continent had half collapsed into the sea, and it was a scene of devastation. As for the Donglai continent, the spiritual vigor was thin, and because of its small size, it was just a drop in the ocean when compared to the 9 continents, but it was able to escape the disaster. As for the 4 continents of East Flower, the southern cliff and northern underworld continents were destroyed. The central pillar was broken by 70%, and it was no longer as majestic as before. Only the East Flower continent, which was protected by the precious divine wood, did not suffer a disaster. Although the corners were damaged, it was still mostly intact. At this moment, the noise of the battle had already calmed down. In the vast world, there were only the surging waves and the cries of seagulls. Zhang Yan let his robe flutter in the oncoming sea breeze, and he stood still for a long time. After enjoying this moment of peace, he took a deep breath, and the light in his eyes brightened again. He said, "Let's go back to the mountain gate." The black tortoise let out a low roar, and in an instant, it turned into a huge wave, sweeping up rolling waves, and flew in the direction of the East Flower continent. About a few hours later, he returned to the Donghua continent. Looking up, he first saw the giant shadow of the great Kun floating above the heavenly cloud sea of Qi, and then the towering figure of the clear nether heavenly lake. After the 2 calamities that the Central Pillar continent had experienced, this place could be regarded as the supreme location of the 9 continents. Suddenly, he felt something and looked down. He saw sect leader Qin standing above the great lake of Dragon Abyss with a smile. Standing next to him were Yu Xianshao and Liang Xuani. From the looks of it, they seemed to be waiting for him. When he got closer, he got down from the black tortoise's back and said, "Thank you for waiting for me, sect leader and the 2 spiritual masters." Sect leader Qin raised his hand and nodded happily. "Hall Master Du Zhen has returned safely. It's the fortune of the Qinsang sect." Yu Xianshao smiled and said, "Hall Master Zhang personally went into danger, killed Lord Lingya, and shattered the Jade Cliff. You did what sect leader Qin and I couldn't do. In terms of fighting ability, you're the best in the 9 continents." Liang Xuani knew that after Zhang Yan returned, the Qinsang and Shaoqing sects would definitely have something to discuss. However, all of this had nothing to do with him, so he said, "Spiritual masters, Lingya is dead, and the matter here is over. I will also keep my promise and won't stay here any longer. After giving some instructions to the disciples of the sect, I will go to the upper worlds. If fate allows it, we might meet again in the future." After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands and floated away. After the 3 of them saw him off, Yu Xianshao said, "Sect leader Qin, now that the enemy has been eliminated, there's no one blocking the way in front of us anymore. There's no need to rush to harvest the earth Qi. We can delay it for a few days, lest we exhaust too much of our power." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "There's no need to fight with Yuxiao now. After we've gathered enough earth Qi, we can wait until everyone's mana is full before we set off." At this moment, Zhang Yan thought of something and said, "When I fought with Lord Lingya, he once said that the situation in the outer world is not stable. The past books in the Hall of Duzhen also vaguely mentioned this, but they were all vague, so it's hard to know the specific reason. Can sect leader's spiritual master clear up my doubts?" Sect leader Qin said, "The outer world is indeed not stable, but there's another reason for this, and it's not as Lingya thinks. Even if Hall Master Duzhen didn't ask, I'll let you know before we go to the new heaven." He took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and said, "This was left by the ancestral master, Hall Master Duzhen can take a look at it." Zhang Yan took it, but he didn't look at it immediately. Instead, he bowed and said, "After killing Lingya and settling the karma of the past, I'll go to Master Zhou's place to report." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "This is reasonable, Hall Master Duzhen can go by yourself." Zhang Yan bowed again and left the place. He stepped on the black smoke and headed in the direction of the Great Pool of Dragon Abyss. After Liang Xuani left the Great Pool of Dragon Abyss, he returned to the mountain gate of the Netherworld Spring sect, but he didn't enter the cave. Instead, he sat cross-legged on a mountain top and shot out a ray of spiritual light. Not long after, a handsome and calm young Taoist came from afar. He came to the front of the carriage, bowed and said, "Sect Master Jinren." Liang Xuani nodded and said, "How's the disciple?" Yuan Hongyang said, everything is fine. Although he was the only one left in the Netherworld Spring Grotto Heaven, half of the disciples were still alive. After all, they had a strong foundation after 10,000 years of inheritance. If there were no external disturbances and they had enough external items to cultivate, it wouldn't be difficult for them to recover their vitality after a few thousand years. Liang Xiuni asked again, how are the 5 sects doing? Yuan Hongyang replied, apart from me and the primary Mirage sect, the other 4 sects have all lost their treasures. As for the Hunching sect and the Bone Yin sect, their cultivators all perished in the calamity. If we want to restore our former glory, I'm afraid it won't be a day's work. Liang Xiuni said, after all, the 6 sects of the spiritual gate are of the same branch. If there's a chance, we'll do our best to help each other. He pondered for a while and said, when Qingxiang of the Xueshua sect always has his own ideas. If you can't make up your mind, you can discuss it with him. Yuan Hongyang said, I understand. Liang Xiuni said, I'll be leaving the realm later. Do you know what you should do when you go with the Qinsang and Shaoqing sects? Yuan Hongyang said in a low voice, I'll just let nature take its course. His words sounded very negative, but Liang Xiuni was not angry. Instead, he praised, if you really think so, I'll be at ease handing over my orthodoxy to you. He pointed with his finger and sent a spiritual light into the space between Yuan Hongyang's eyebrows. He said, from today onwards, you're the 8th sect master of the Netherworld Spring sect. Yuan Hongyang stood there for a while. With a thought, a rolling, muddy Netherworld river floated out of his body. Liang Xiuni said, this is the sect's treasure. With your current transcendence energy, you still can't unleash much of its power. However, it's enough to protect your life. When you reach my level of cultivation, you'll understand its wonders. You must remember, even if all the disciples in the sect die, as long as this item is not lost, the Netherworld Spring sect's orthodoxy will not end. Yuan Hongyang bowed and said, I'll definitely remember it. Liang Xiuni said, I can't stay for long. Do you have anything else to ask? Yuan Hongyang thought for a while and said, may I ask, sect master, if my cultivation reaches that stage, will I be able to meet the patriarch smoothly? Liang Xiuni shook his head and said, everything depends on fate. If he ascended now, he could still borrow the patriarch's talismans to guide him. However, if this generation went to the new heaven, it would be the same as cutting off this path. Moreover, the void heaven world was so vast that it was almost impossible to meet them again. Yuan Hongyang said in a low voice, I understand. Seeing that he had no more questions, Liang Xiuni gave him a few more reminders and said, you can leave now. Don't look back. Yuan Hongyang left as he was told. Just now, after walking for more than 1,000 miles, a muddy light flashed behind him. For a moment, the sky and the sun dimmed, as if they had fallen into the underworld. He couldn't help but stop, but he still obeyed the order and didn't look back. After a long time, the movement behind him gradually stopped. He turned around, bowed to the sky, and left in a yellow smoke. Chapter 12:29. Inside the fish boat, Zhang Yan and Zhou Chengju sat opposite each other. Ling Ye has been executed, and the Zhou clan has been destroyed. I have no more worries in this life. Zhou Chengju let out a long sigh, and the obsession of 1,000 years dissipated. He shook his head, stood up, and walked to the railing. He looked at the lake outside the pavilion and did not say anything for a long time. Zhang Yan also came outside and looked at the lake from the railing. After a long time, Zhou Chengju said emotionally, that senior did not lie to me. Junior brother is indeed a person who can turn the world upside down. Zhang Yan's eyes moved slightly. He had thought about Doran's identity in the past, but his memory of this person was all from his previous life. Now that he thought about it, his appearance and figure were all blurry. Even with his current cultivation, he still felt that he could not see through him. He judged that this person's cultivation level was far beyond what he had imagined. However, there were some things that he did not have an answer for now, so there was no need to delve into it. If they were fated, they would find out in the future. With a flick of his finger, a ray of spiritual light flew out and turned into a light screen in front of him. Inside the screen, there were countless techniques and mystic arts floating by. He said, before Zhou Yangting died, he showed me the Jade Heaven technique, mystic arts, divine arts, and Taoist arts. He said that he wanted to hand them over to you. Zhou Chengju was a little surprised. He thought about it seriously for a while, and then said in a very determined tone, these techniques are the result of the wisdom and effort of the predecessors. They should not be destroyed. However, since they are in my hands, they will no longer be the techniques of a single family. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior brother has not accepted any disciples in these years. After you go to Xintian, why don't you consider choosing a few disciples to continue the Yuxiao True technique? He had no prejudice against Yuxiao school. Publicly, the Qinsang school and Yuxiao school were just a battle of Dao. There was no right or wrong. Privately, the Zhou clan was destroyed, and the cause and effect was over. Even if Master Lingya appeared in front of him again, as long as he did not provoke him, he would not pay much attention to him. Zhou Chengju smiled. Facing the warm breeze on the lake, he said, I don't have much time left. It is indeed time to find a few disciples. In the sky above Donghua continent, Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting were flying in the direction of Dongxing continent. Because of this, the battle had already been decided, and the Dark Azure sect had previously promised to bring the two sects to the outside world, so they allowed them to bring their disciples over. They looked at the broken continent behind them, and there was shock in their expressions. They were also glad. If they hadn't been forcefully invited by the Black Tsang sect to dig up the earth chi, they might have already died in the great calamity. Since the start of the war, they had been absorbing the earth chi non-stop, and had indeed lost a lot of their original essence chi. But compared to their own lives, it was nothing. Gan Shouting said, over 80% of the grotto heavens of the small worlds and grotto heavens have been destroyed. Gan Shouting said, more than 80% of the small worlds and grotto heavens in the world have been destroyed. More than half of the Dongtian's people have died. Naturally, there is a lot of surplus. However, this is just a flash in the pan. After the chi of the earth is absorbed, the spiritual vigor will definitely decline. Even after tens of thousands of years, it may not be able to recover to its current situation. Gan Shouting said, unfortunately, there will be no more cultivators in the 9 continents. Gan Shouting said in a deep voice, it's a pity that there will no longer be any cultivators in the 9 continents. Ji Xiangping did not think much of it and sneered, 9 continents? Ji Xiangping didn't care and sneered, 9 continents? Even if there are no more cultivators, so what? Heaven and earth can still decline, and the sun and moon have to fall. Our lifespan is long. Compared to this, it is just a moment. Why think so much? Isn't that just asking for trouble? Gan Shouting was startled, and then nodded. Brother Ji is really insightful. Fine. Let's not think too much. Let's just bring our disciples here. We can talk about the future in the future. Several days later, in front of the Dragon Lake, a cluster of fog was faintly floating. This was the location of the Heaven Mending Pavilion's mountain gate. All the disciples here had already died under the final attack of the Qianyu quantitative victory technique. However, because the sect's mountain gate was a formation diagram, it was not destroyed. 3 streams of clear air flashed. Du Yunzhan, Hu Xian, Ning Chengxian, and Lu Junyang appeared. They were ordered by the mountain gate to find a way to collect this square formation map. Even though the inheritance of the Heaven Mending Pavilion had already been severed, the many magical treasures and refining techniques still existed. After going to Tian, killing and fighting were unavoidable. Instead of letting these things rot here, it was better to take them away. At the same time, in front of the mountain gate of Nanhua sect, Tao Zhenren rode a green phoenix. Since all the disciples of Nanhua sect were dead, many of the spiritual birds and beasts were masterless. Many of them realized the death of their owners and died by hitting the wall. Some of them were also curled up there, motionless, not eating or drinking. After Tao Zhenhong read through it, he sighed softly. He took out the seal of the sect master of Southern Flower Sect and put away all the animals in the mountain. Then, he walked around the sect and took away all the valuable items before leaving. Not only these two sects, but the remaining Xian men also had cultivators sent out by Qinsang school to collect cultivation items. The core jade was even more important. As for the secret manuals, although the cultivators of Qinsang and Shaoqing sects did not really care about them, they could greatly fill up their vaults for future generations to study and study. 3 months later. Although many perfected ones had not safely recovered their vitality, the earth qi was drying up, and the spiritual vigor was running out. The remaining spirit caves in the sky were also collapsing. The two sect masters, Qin and Yu, had already realized that they could not wait any longer. So, Qinsang and Shaoqing sects opened a portal to a small world in the Donghua continent and issued a notice that the two sects would leave for outer space in half a month. Those who wanted to go with them could stay in the inner world. In these days, all the cultivators who survived the great calamity in the 9 continents, including some itinerant cultivators, had sensed that the spiritual vigor of the world was turning from prosperity to decline. When they heard the news, most of them hurried to the east and north, afraid that they would miss the opportunity and be left behind in the barren land of the 9 continents. On this day, a young Taoist wearing a beast-subduing collar arrived in front of the portal. He was dressed plainly and did not stand out among the group of itinerant cultivators. He spoke to a jade pendant on his waist through telepathy. "Master, Qinsang school told us to enter that small world, but how can we go to other worlds beyond this world?" A figure appeared from the jade pendant and said, "Do you see that giant koan?" The young Taoist looked at the mountain-like figure in the sky and replied, "It's hard not to see it." The figure said, "My clones heard that this giant koan was left behind by the founder of Qinsang school, Tai Mingzhenren. It can bring many small worlds to the new world." The young Taoist nodded and said, "I see." He looked up and saw 2 beams of light shining down from the portal. He was shocked and said, "Master, the demon-subduing mirrors from Huanjin Temple are hanging in front of the portal. Please wait for me. Please be careful, Master." The figure sighed and said, "My power is weak now and I can't help you much. In fact, you don't have to bring me there. That might expose you instead." The young Taoist shook his head. He said, "Master, if you didn't remind me to get out of the small world in time, I wouldn't be able to avoid this calamity and repay you. Even if I can't get through, I won't abandon you and leave alone." When the tribulation of man occurred, he was cultivating in the grotto. However, the shapeless figure reminded him that none of the disciples of the Jade Heaven sect had entered the small world. He immediately knew that there must be something going on. He immediately retreated from the grotto and escaped with his life. In the past, he only wanted to seek protection from this person, but at that moment, he was grateful from the bottom of his heart. He took a deep breath and tried to make his expression as natural as possible. He said, "Master, I'm sorry." As he said this, he took out 2 pieces of copper from his sleeve and wrapped them around the jade pendant. Since he knew that there was a pair of demon-subduing mirrors guarding him, he was not unprepared. These 2 copper plates were the fragments of the copper cauldron that came from outer space. He had refined them again and used them as a cover. He thought to himself, "Can I get through? It all depends on this trial." He walked forward and stopped in front of the portal. The mirror light shone on his head. At that moment, a female cultivator who was guarding the gate suddenly exclaimed in surprise. He looked confused and his heart tightened. However, his expression did not change. He just secretly held onto the beast-subduing collar and was ready to make a move at any time. The female cultivator gave him a sweet smile and said, "Senior apprentice brother, you have such pure Xianmen mana. Are you a disciple of some sect?" The young Taoist secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He turned his head and replied with a smile, "I'm just a wandering cultivator. I was lucky to get some inheritance from my ancestors." The female cultivator widened her beautiful eyes and exclaimed, "Senior apprentice brother, it must not have been easy for you to cultivate to this level." Maybe it was because she rarely saw wandering cultivators like him, so she asked him a few more questions excitedly. The young Taoist answered her with a few words and was finally allowed to go. After passing through the portal, he felt like he was exhausted. He used his mana slightly and recovered some of his energy. He looked at the many cultivators who were meditating in front of the small world and thought to himself, I, Fang Shenan, will sooner or later transcend above the masses. My life will no longer be controlled by others. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. It was finally the day to set off. Zhang Yan stood on the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake and looked down at the vast land. After the earth qi was released, it would take tens of thousands of years for it to recover. The spiritual opportunity of the world would no longer exist. In the future, if people wanted to seek the path of immortality, they would not be able to enter it. However, he was still able to pass down that cultivation technique and leave behind a chance for those in the future to enter the Tao. He raised his finger and dripped a drop of blood essence on the ground. After a while, the blood essence turned into a Taoist in his 30s. He had a high forehead and bright eyes. He looked like he was knowledgeable and had extraordinary wisdom. His strength path cultivation level was around rank 4. Zhang Yan said, I'll leave this place to you. The Taoist smiled and said, with me here, you can rest assured. If there is a fated person, he or she will be able to comprehend our mystical technique. After saying that, he bowed, rode a cloud, and floated down the mountain. A ray of light came over, and Wang Kaiwei appeared beside him. She bowed and said, Benefactor, the time has come. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I understand. With a sway of his body, he instantly tore through the void and arrived at the top of a large hall. At this moment, all the Grotto Heaven's enlightened masters were gathered here. When they saw him, they stood up and greeted him. Zhang Yan nodded and walked through the palace. Under everyone's gaze, he walked up the stairs and sat down on the jade platform after greeting Sect Master Qin and Sect Master Yu. Sect Master Qin turned around and said to him, I will open the door to heaven and earth later, I will ask Hall Master Duzhen to protect me. Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn and said, Disciple understands. Sect Master Qin nodded slightly. He waved his horsetail whisk and sat in silence for a while. After a while, the entire palace started to tremble. Everyone looked up and saw a crack in the sky. It was like a bottomless hole. At this moment, a beam of light suddenly rose from the main hall and poured into it. In an instant, the 9 continents of the world seemed to be connected together. Chapter 1230. When Zhang Yan looked up, he saw that sect leader Qin had already turned into a ray of light that pierced through the heavens and the earth. Only his body was left on the praying mat. Thud, he had read the talisman book left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Only then did he know that the gate of heaven and earth in the land of 9 continents was far from other places, and it was very difficult to enter and exit it. When a cultivator reached the Grotto Heaven realm, they would have a magic treasure to protect them, and they would be able to travel in the void. However, because of this, only those who had reached the mortal transformation realm could do this. If sect leader Qin went to the upper realm alone, it wouldn't be difficult. However, if he wanted to bring all the cultivators in the world with him, he would have to maintain the gate of heaven and earth from closing in a short period of time. This was many times more difficult than before. Outsiders would not be able to help with such matters. At this moment, if another mortal metamorphosis cultivator were to intervene, due to the incompatibility of qi dynamics, the final result would definitely lead to the collision of the two peoples fatally, and the person who broke the boundary might even perish. The previous battle to annihilate Yu Xiao was not only to collect the earth qi, but also to prevent Lingya from disturbing them. However, both he and Yu Xianxiao looked calm at the moment. It was indeed impossible for sect leader Qin to do this alone, but with the help of magic treasures, it was different. In order to deal with the current situation, the two sects were already prepared. In just 1 or 2 breaths, a bamboo-shaped fish flew out of the floating heavenly palace and went straight to the other side of the sky cave in the sky. At the same time, the sound of drums beating could be heard from below. Every time it was beaten, the gate of heaven and earth seemed to be shaken. It was as if there was a mysterious force constantly passing through it, causing it to be unable to close. This was the Sky Fusion Drum, the ultimate treasure of the Qinsang school. It was a treasure used to control the giant Kun, but it also had another function. As long as there was something connected with the Qi in front of it, even if it was in different worlds, as long as there was a sound of the drum, it could also shake open a path. When Zhang Yan saw that the two treasures were almost done, he stopped the bridge of heaven and earth. He said in a clear voice, "Everyone, go quickly. Don't delay." Yu Xianshao also shouted in a deep voice, "Anyone who hesitates will be killed." When the crowd heard this, most of them felt a chill in their hearts. No one dared to hesitate. They all activated their escape lights and rushed into the heavenly gate. In the blink of an eye, dozens of green lights disappeared. Zhang Yan's body flickered and he arrived at the sky-closing drum. He didn't even need the drumsticks. He only raised his finger and lightly knocked on the drum. The mountain-like body of the Kun immediately moved. First, he came forward, opened his mouth, and swallowed. After swallowing the floating heavenly palace and the green heavenly hall, Kun slowly moved its body and moved towards the heavenly gate. Because it had been weak for too long, the only thing it could do now was to protect the many small worlds when it broke the world. Even hiding the people of the heavenly abode was a burden. If it was at its peak, it wouldn't have to worry about all this. As long as he pointed out the path ahead, he would be able to break through the gate of heaven with his own strength. He crashed into the other world. However, after this trip to New Heaven, if he had enough spiritual energy and a few hundred years of recuperation, it wouldn't be hard for him to recover. While everyone was moving, the qi of the earth that they had extracted previously kept pouring into the Kun and the sky-closing drum. The spiritual energy in the Donghua continent was originally very thin. There wasn't even a single drop left. After about half an hour, as the qi of the earth became less and less, the huge figure of the Kun finally successfully passed through the gate of heaven and earth. Zhang Yan made up his mind. As long as the Kun passed through, the matter would be half done. Meanwhile, above the 9 continents, only he and Yu Xianshao were left. He said, "Sect leader Yu, I need to collect the qi of the earth from the magic treasures. Please go first." Yu Xianshao nodded and looked up. His body turned into a magnificent sword light and shot out, disappearing into the heavenly gate in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan turned around and looked at the 9 continents for the last time. Then, he flicked his sleeves and rolled up all the remaining qi of the earth and the sky-closing drum. Then, he jumped up. Practically at the instant he rose and flew, the ray of clear light that connected the heavens and the earth withdrew as well. Once he entered the hole in the sky, the heavenly pass closed with a bang. When Zhang Yan jumped out of the 9 continents, he felt his body float. It was as if his body was extending infinitely, and it was also as if he was flying rapidly. He looked up and saw countless brilliant nebulas around him. They were bright and dazzling. At this moment, rays of starlight shot toward him like hundreds of millions of sharp arrows. However, as soon as they touched him, they all disappeared as if they were swallowed. He had seen this situation in the records of the great underworld patriarch Jade Talisman, so he wasn't surprised. Raising his head, he saw that the huge Kun was right in front of him. His body flashed and he rushed over. However, at this moment, he had a strange feeling. When his power reached the 6th revolution, he had received help from an indescribable thing. At this moment, that thing seemed to have appeared again. However, this feeling disappeared in an instant. When he wanted to search for it again, it was already gone. He pondered for a moment and didn't bother with it. He rushed to the top of the Kun and landed steadily on it. Then, he walked forward. When he passed by the Kun's back, he saw that all the Taoists were sitting cross-legged and didn't say anything. As soon as they entered this place, their essence energy and spiritual opportunity spread out. Although they had refined magic treasures to protect themselves, they didn't know how long they would stay here. Thus, in order to reduce consumption, they all sealed their acupoints to sense. Sect Master Qin and Yu Xianshao were standing on the Kun's head, waiting for him to arrive. Zhang Yan walked forward. When he felt the divine wills of the two sect masters, he knew that they had something to discuss with them. Thus, he took the opportunity and entered a dark space. Here, the three of them were no longer restricted by the outside world. Sect Master Qin said, "We have already entered the Void Origin realm. With the guidance of the divine will of the third-generation Sect Master, as long as we can sense where that world is, it won't be difficult to enter." Zhang Yan and Yu Xianxiao both nodded. People who didn't know about the ascension method would think that they just needed to break through space to reach the other side. In reality, it wasn't that simple. Furthermore, due to the differences in cultivation and the different magical treasures they possessed, the methods they used were also different. Unless a powerful cultivator could see through the chaotic fog and point to the other side. The method they used now was to break through the heaven and earth realm and jump into the Void Origin realm. Compared to other places, this place was at least separated from the past and the future. Once they reached this place, they could find the other world to enter. This was also the method used by the past perfected beings of Qinsang school. If there was a talisman leading them here, they would be able to find a way out in the vast void ocean. However, if there was no talisman, they could only search one by one. If they weren't careful, it was possible that they would fall into a place with no spiritual opportunity. At that time, they could only die of old age there. It was more likely that they would be trapped here before they could find the upper realm. They had the divine will of the third-generation sect master. Although they could accurately guide them to the other world, there was no one on the other side. Even if they found it, they would have to break through the heaven and earth gate themselves. Sect Master Qin said, "However, there is a variable here. Originally, I thought that we would have enough time to find the place, but the innate chaotic vitality light here is more than several times stronger than the records say. If we can find it in a few years, there will be no danger. However, if we take too long, there might be unforeseen events." The so-called innate chaotic vitality light was something unique to the Void Origin realm. The innate chaotic vitality light was unique to the Void Primordial realm. This light pointed directly to the innate origin. Even with the protection of magic treasures and the concealment of a small realm, it couldn't block it. However, it was fine to be hit at the beginning. However, the longer one stayed in the Void Primordial realm, the weaker one's resistance to this light. When the last light fell, it could destroy one's soul and body. When a cultivator reached the mortal transformation realm, this light couldn't do anything to him. However, for the people in the heavenly abode, it could easily damage their foundation. As for the ordinary disciples, they couldn't resist it. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Sect Master Zhenren, if that's the case, let's follow the plan we discussed earlier. Sect Master Yu and I will help you find the place as soon as possible." Yu Xianxiao said with a serious expression, "Exactly." Moving to a new world was no small matter. If they were not careful, they would be destroyed in the void ocean. Therefore, they had made careful arrangements for this trip and thought of countermeasures in advance for possible situations. Sect Master Qin nodded and pointed his finger. Both of them felt a vast divine will converge with them at the same time. Zhang Yan only felt his body tremble slightly. The scene in front of him changed. He was still standing in the void primordial realm. At this moment, when he looked around, there were many mysterious caves rising and falling. There was no difference in size, and there was no beginning or end. Life was death, and death was life. In each mysterious cave, there seemed to be a world. One of them was full of vitality and infinitely vast. It faintly resonated with his spiritual vigor. It seemed that he could enter it with just a thought. He understood that this scene was what the third sect master had experienced in the past. At the moment, he only had the body of strength, but his chi path hadn't reached such a level. It would be very beneficial for him to see it. He withdrew his divine will from the void ocean and sat down to sense it carefully. After a while, mysterious caves appeared in front of him. They were very similar to what he saw just now. So, he began to observe carefully. In the blink of an eye, 6 years had passed according to the 9 continents calendar. One day, Zhang Yan's expression changed as he sat in meditation. Although he did not find that place, he felt that there was a heaven and earth that was somewhat similar to the original land of the 9 continents. At this time, he felt sect leader Qin's divine intent saying, "I found it." Zhang Yan immediately focused his mind and looked in the direction of sect master Qin's divine will. Indeed, he saw that place. He slowly stood up and stood on the head of the kun with sect master Qin and Yu Xianxiao. He used his divine will to say, "Dear spiritual masters, we have arrived." At the same time, the spiritual masters who were sitting still on the back of the kun opened their eyes and stood up. With the help of the trio's divine wills, they also looked in that direction. Their eyes were filled with anticipation and vigilance. However, as soon as they released their senses to sense the apertures, the spiritual vigor on their bodies immediately spread outwards. However, at this moment, no one cared about this anymore. In the primordial sea of the void, rays of spiritual light shot up into the sky. Then, they saw the huge kun stride across the vast void sky and crash into a mysterious cave with earth-shattering momentum. In an instant, the gate of heaven and earth was smashed open. Chapter 12:31. The eastern wasteland was vast and boundless. Its mountainous terrain extended from the west to the southeast, finally turning into a chaotic cliff that penetrated deep into the vast power sea. A small tribe called the Zhan tribe occupied this place. Near the sea, white waves that were over 100 feet tall surged over, constantly crashing against the reefs on the shore. From time to time, there would be loud noises. If one stood in front of it, one's mind would be shaken by the majestic aura. Not far away, on the yellow beach, a skinny boy of 11 or 12 years old was holding a wooden shovel and digging something with all his might. Beside his feet was a straw basket. He was extremely focused and careful. As the pit became deeper and deeper, his small body also sank into it. He could only see clumps of sand flying out. At this moment, if someone pushed the sand on both sides, he would immediately be buried out. Suddenly, his hand paused. He heard a dull thud as if he had touched something. His eyes lit up, and he immediately abandoned the wooden shovel. He dug with both hands and dug out a shell that had many holes on its edge. However, the surface was smooth, and it was obviously polished by someone. He carefully brushed away the sand and saw a strange pattern carved on it. Even though the strokes were simple, it looked ancient and powerful. It exuded a sense of desolation and desolation. "This is it!" he exclaimed excitedly. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound. Little crabs crawled out of the straw baskets at their feet one after another. Oh no! He grabbed the shell tightly, not even caring about the wooden shovel, and jumped out of the sandpit. The moment he left, the beach suddenly exploded, and a 3-foot-long, 2-clawed, white-bellied strange fish jumped out. The young man flipped on the sand and stood up. He watched the fish bite at him with its sharp teeth. He wiped away the sand and sweat on his face and thought, that was close. He didn't dare to stay here any longer. He ran towards the cliff that stood by the shore. After running for 3 to 4 miles, he finally reached the bottom of the cliff. On the cliff, there were many houses and corridors along the crevices of the mountain. It looked like they had spent a lot of effort to dig holes in the hard rock. They were built by inserting wooden wedges and inserting them. Above, someone clasped his hands and shouted, "Little monkey, come up quickly. The bird is coming." The little monkey answered, "Got it." Holding the shell in his mouth, he sprinted up a high slope, leaped into the air, caught hold of a hanging rope, and began to climb. In just a few steps, he had reached the first foothold. Then, with the help of the wooden wedges protruding from the rock wall, he climbed up to the 300 feet high stone platform in one go. His body was as agile as a little monkey. However, at this point, there was still a distance of about 10 feet from the top, and there was nothing to borrow strength from. The soft rope that was supposed to be hanging there was also nowhere to be seen. At this moment, an anxious urging voice came from above. "Quick! Little monkey, hurry up!" The little monkey only heard a faint hissing sound in the sea breeze. Looking back, he saw that above the boundless azure sea in the distance, there were a few black shadows appearing at the end of the horizon. They were densely packed and seemed to be endless. He couldn't help but shiver. Gritting his teeth, he stepped on the rock wall and took a few steps back. Almost to the edge of the stone platform, he exerted his strength and rushed forward again. Stepping on the slightly slanted cliff wall, he took a few steps and reached out his hand to hook onto the gangplank above. However, he was small and weak after all. When the momentum dissipated, he was still a little short. Just as he was about to fall, a thick arm stretched out from above, grabbed him, and pulled him up. The owner of the arm was a lean man. He threw him to the ground and scolded, "Little monkey spirit, I'll pull you up for your sister's sake. The next time you go out at this time, I won't bother you." The little monkey spat out the shell and got up with a grunt. With a cheeky smile, he said, "Thank you, brother you." However, the man's face darkened. He pressed down on the monkey's head and stuffed it into a cave at the side. He urged, "You still have the mood to laugh. Hurry up and hide." The little monkey bent down and hid in a narrow and cramped crevice. There were already a few children inside, and they were all winking at him. He chuckled and hid in a corner. He carefully put the shell in his arms. The man outside the crevice had a solemn expression. He looked into the distance. At this time, he could already see the appearance of the black dots. They were large birds with white feathers and scarlet eyes. They had thick beaks and huge bodies. Their bodies emitted a fierce aura. He didn't dare to delay. He took a few steps and hid in a cave that he had dug in advance. After about a dozen breaths, the shrill cries became sharper and more rapid. They converged into a tidal wave that seemed to be able to tear one's eardrums. When the demonic birds got close, they smashed into the gray vines on the rock wall one by one, making loud thumping sounds. The little monkey hugged its head and curled up in the corner. It could hear the violent pounding outside, but it didn't dare to move. It took a full hour for the noises outside to calm down. After a while, the sound of drums could be heard. The little monkey and the children knew that the crisis was over. They all cheered and couldn't wait to climb out of the crevice. It wasn't just them. From top to bottom, from the rock cave that stretched for tens of miles, there were also figures coming out. There seemed to be more than 10,000 of them. However, many of the houses were damaged and broken. There were also people who were dragged out of the cave and pecked to death by the birds. Their mutilated corpses fell down the cliff. It was incomparably miserable. However, the tribes that survived by the sea had people dying every day. The people in the tribes were already used to it. Suddenly, someone shouted, "It's the red pouch." The little monkey quivered. It grabbed the railing and looked down. It saw a pouch that was about half the size of a human head on the stone platform below. It looked bright and dazzling. It was very attractive. However, it was a pity that someone had already taken it. An old man wearing a thick feathered robe carefully picked up the pouch with a few strong men. He looked at it carefully and called out happily, "It's the 100 years pouch. Young gun, come and drink it. Go away, go away." A young man who was as strong as a calf walked over and pushed aside the children in front of him. He went down the rope and snatched the pouch. He raised his head and gulped it down. The red liquid flowed from the corner of his mouth and chest and dripped onto the ground. Immediately, a fragrant smell wafted in the air. The old man said with great heartache, "Slow down, slow down. Don't waste it." The little monkey looked at all of this with great envy. Many children who were about the same age as it were also drooling. They widened their eyes and swallowed with their dirty fingers. The birds had the habit of storing the food they swallowed in their mandibles. Because they often swallowed the essence of plants that could nourish each other, over time, the juice accumulated in their mandibles could be compared to natural treasures. Even if an adult in the tribe drank a mouthful of it, even if they didn't eat or drink for a day and night, they wouldn't feel tired. However, usually, Only those who had trained their muscles and bones and were taught the secret method of strengthening their vitality by the priests could swallow so much in one go. If it was an ordinary child, he could taste it drop by drop. This young man called Zhang Gun was the grandson of the tribe leader. He had been practicing the technique of strengthening his vitality since he was 3 years old. His strength was far beyond that of his peers. After he finished drinking the juice, his whole body became extremely red. He burped and spat out a gust of hot air. He threw the bag down the cliff. This action immediately attracted many children to climb down the rope, rushing to fight for the leftovers. Zhang Gun laughed. The little monkey hesitated. It didn't fight for the leftovers, but it held the shell in its hand even tighter. The old man in the feathered robe looked at Zhang Gun affectionately. He jumped onto the back of a large eagle and whistled. Then, he rode it to the cliff cave at the top of the cliff. The cave was very spacious. It was about 10 feet long and wide. From the marks on the wall, it could be seen that it was made by manpower. Walking into the inner room, he took off his feather robe and threw it to a pretty young girl. Then he lay down on a soft couch covered with fur. A maid knelt in front of the couch and came over to massage his back and legs. At this time, another girl came in and said, "Tribe leader. The high priest is here." The old tribe leader hurriedly said, "Invite him in." After a while, a strong man with long hair and deep eyes came in. The old tribe leader waved his hand and said, "All of you can leave." All the maids left the cave. When only the 2 of them were left, he propped himself up and said, "High priest, this is the 3rd flock of birds this month. The frog belly vines are about to run out. Does the high priest know the reason?" These membrane belly vines could eat humans, beasts, and monsters. The Zhan tribe planted them on the cliff and used these vines to protect themselves from all kinds of enemies. However, if these vines grew too much, it would also pose a danger to the entire tribe. However, these vines were also the favorite food of the birds. They would come to hunt every month. However, these birds were stupid and much easier to deal with than those fierce monsters. In this way, not only would there not be too many membrane belly vines, but they could also avoid the invasion of monsters. The Zhan tribe cleverly used the balance and were able to reproduce on the sea cliff for more than 100 years. However, everything was different since last month. Every other day, a flock of birds would fly over, which was very different from the past. The high priest said, "These birds are not here to forage. They seem to have migrated from the north." The old man was startled. He frowned and said, "North? Did something happen there?" The high priest said, "It's hard to say. Maybe there's an extra ancient demon." The old tribe leader rubbed his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "Ancient demon, that is possible." In the past, when the ancient demon appeared, it would treat all the living creatures around it as food, causing several groups of monsters to flee. Although the birds had low intelligence, they would also try to escape when danger came. The old tribe leader sighed and said, "If that's the case, there will be more flocks of birds coming." However, once the frog belly vines are eaten, without these vines to hide, not to mention the monsters in the sea, even the monsters in the forest far away will climb up and eat me up after smelling our flesh and blood. The high priest could not help but fall silent. Although he had some supernatural powers, he was helpless against thousands of birds. The old tribe leader obviously understood this. He stared at the high priest and said, "I only ask one thing from you. If the Zhan tribe cannot hold on any longer, please bring my son along when you leave and send him to the Eastern Barren Kingdom." He took off the beast bone necklace from his neck and threw it over. "If you agree, it's yours." The high priest caught it and looked at it. He thought for a while and said, "The Eastern Barren Kingdom is very far away from here. I can only do my best." The old tribe leader grinned and said, "As long as you say that. There are a few maids outside, take whichever one you like." The high priest hesitated for a while and nodded. Night fell quickly. The little monkey's parents died early and only his sister was left as a maid. Nobody cared about him. After he returned to his residence, he ate the dried noodles that his sister had left for him. He then left the house and walked along a corridor for 2 to 3 miles before arriving at a cave. This place was a natural cave. A year ago, a lame shaman from a destroyed tribe came to seek refuge with the tribe. The old chief saw that he was a good talker and asked him to join the tribe. The old tribe leader saw that he was a good talker and had a rough understanding of medicine, so he allowed him to stay here. However, this person seemed to have traveled the barren continent and was good at talking about the ancient times. Therefore, many children and young people were attracted here every day to listen to his interesting stories. The little monkey loved listening to him talk about the ancient times, so he came here early. At this moment, the sky was dim and the cave was damp and cold. A bonfire had been lit in advance. It was hard to tell the age of the lame high priest. His hair was all white. His beard was sparse and he was wearing a thick hemp robe. He was taking a nap there. After a while, people came one after another. Most of them were dirty children and young people. They sat down in a circle. The lame high priest opened his eyes. Seeing that most people had arrived, he coughed. He was about to speak. "Get out of the way, get out of the way." A shout came from outside. Jean Gun swaggered in, surrounded by a few sturdy teenagers. Without waiting for his order, his subordinates drove the children to the side, and even the little monkey was forced to step aside and go to the corner. He sat opposite the lame high priest and raised his chin. He said, "That lame old man, you can start now." The lame high priest knew that he was the tribe leader's grandson. Now that he was living under someone else's roof, he didn't want to offend him. He said, "Today, I will talk about Uncle Yuan splitting open the sky." Jean Gun waved his hand impatiently. "Isn't it just after Uncle Yuan transformed into heaven and earth? I've heard about the two brothers Bobai and Bushwan taking charge of the sun and moon." "Change it up." The young people beside him shouted, "Change it up, change it up." The lame high priest didn't get angry and said, "All right, then let's talk about the barren continent giving birth to tens of thousands of spirits, the pure spirit human evolution fruit, the turbid spirits turning into demons." Zhang Gun interrupted, "I've heard of this as well. I heard that you came from the desolate continent. You must have heard of the Eastern Wasteland Kingdom, right? They built many earthen platforms, and they can even cook great demons and ancient demons." The lame high priest smiled and said, "Young tribe leader is talking about the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom, not the Eastern Barren Kingdom. It's not an earth platform, it's a slaughtering platform. It was originally a platform to kill demons, but someone thought it was too murderous and changed it to a drawing platform." Zhang Gun was confused. "Isn't the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom the same as the Eastern Barren Kingdom?" The lame high priest shook his head and said, "It's not the same, it's not the same. 10,000 years ago, 1,300 tribes were forced by the demons to swear an oath of blood at Mount Daxiang. They offered sacrifices to the heavens and the earth, establishing the Eastern Barren Kingdom and suppressing the Tianyuan plains. The people in the kingdom were brave and strong, able to fight against the dragons in the sea and the demons in the mountains. 7,000 years ago, the Divine Kingdom collapsed and was scattered into hundreds of countries. The Eastern Barren Kingdom was established by the descendants of the Gong family of the Divine Kingdom. It's considered the most powerful among all the countries, but it can't be compared to the Divine Kingdom of the past." Zhang Gun wasn't a good-tempered person, he was slightly annoyed and said, "Then let's talk about the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom." The lame high priest nodded and told them the stories and rumors that were passed down from the Divine Kingdom one by one. He was very eloquent. Whether it was Zhang Gun, the little monkey, or even the children, they were all attracted by the magnificent stories that were told on the barren land thousands of years ago. Especially when he talked about the mystic cultivators who could summon the wind and rain with a wave of their hands and enslave demons, they even exclaimed and wished that they could be in their place. The lame high priest had been talking for more than 2 hours, but the more he talked, the more excited he became, and the more his eyes shone. The reason why the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom could fight against the ancient demons was because of the mystic cultivators. But a weak country can't raise its cultivators, and a small number of cultivators can't make a country strong. What is a country? Tens, hundreds, even thousands of tribes, united as one, have the power to open up wastelands and forests, to level mountains and fill seas, to kill demons and demons, and to protect the human world. Only then can it be called a country. A country must defend its borders, a country must raise its strength, a country must raise its cultivators, a country must raise its cultivators, and a country must raise its cultivators. Back then, in the Divine Kingdom, there were 3,000 books. Golden seal scripts were engraved with knives, lines were pricked with needles, and words were written on jade bones and fur. Throughout the tens of thousands of years of the Divine Kingdom, there were countless brave and strong people, but in the end, they all became great people. All of them were wise and knowledgeable people. With brute force, they couldn't fight against the ancient demons. When he got excited, he picked up a branch and drew a few words on the ground. The little monkey stretched its neck and stared without blinking, as if it was immersed in the story. However, these youths and children were listening to his story and were not interested in these dry words that were like scribbles. Coupled with the fact that they were tired, many of them began to yawn. Jean Gun stood up and said in disdain, "Hey, what's the use of learning this? Could he defeat the desolate ancient beast demon? If you have the time, you might as well roast 2 fat fish. You can see them and touch them. If you eat them today, you can poop them tomorrow. Go back, go back." He waved his hand. A few young children followed him out. A voice came from outside. "Young master is right. What Wengu? It's just a bag of old bones. I can kill it with one punch. No matter how many words it knows, it can only rot in its stomach. What's the use? Ha, if you have the time. I might as well draw the bow a few more times and lift the stone a few more times." The rest of the children were reluctant to leave. They were waiting anxiously for the next part of the story to be told. However, when they saw the crippled shaman's concentrated expression, they felt bored and left one by one. In the end, only the little monkey stayed behind. After a long time, the lame shaman finally finished writing. He put down the branch and looked over. "Why didn't you leave?" The little monkey took out the shell that it got during the day. It passed it to him. "Mystic teacher, you said that as long as I find a word, you will give me a name." The lame shaman was a little surprised. "I didn't expect you to really find it." He took it and looked at it. "This is the word, Lu." 8,000 years ago, the Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom built the Lu Crossing Tower here to defend against the ancient demons in the sea. Since you are fated with this word, and your Zhan tribe uses Zhan as their surname, I will be called Zhan Lu. How about that? The little monkey nodded. He happily picked up the branch and wrote his name on the ground. The lame shaman looked at it and saw that it was quite decent. He asked curiously, "Have you learned how to write before?" The little monkey scratched its head and said embarrassedly, "The word, Zhan, is everywhere. Many people can recognize it. The word, Lu, only has a few strokes, so it's easy to remember." The lame shaman looked at it and suddenly stretched out his leg to wipe the words on the ground. He asked, "Can you write down the words just now on the ground?" The little monkey scratched its head and wrote seriously. Although it was crooked, it managed to write more than 80 words out of the 100 or so words. The lame shaman nodded. "Not bad. Are you willing to learn how to write from me?" The little monkey's eyes lit up and it nodded furiously. The lame shaman asked again, "Why do you want to learn?" The little monkey said, "I think it's useful." The lame shaman sighed and said, "You are fated. Let me ask you, do you know the biggest difference between humans and demons?" The little monkey thought for a while and said, "Demons eat humans." The lame shaman smiled. Demons eat humans, but they also eat demons. Remember, we are born as humans, different from beasts and demons. We are born with intelligence, but without knowledge, we still can't become humans. Intelligence is given by the heavens, while knowledge is acquired. Look at the old tribe leader, he is considered a person with intelligence and knowledge. That's why he could lead the Zhan tribe to live by the sea. But if it were the young tribe leader, do you think he would succeed? The little monkey quickly shook its head. The lame shaman said, therefore, even if you have intelligence and knowledge, you still lack one thing, and that is learning. Only by learning can you inherit the knowledge and wisdom of the predecessors. But a person's energy is limited. If he can't learn, how can he pass on the knowledge? Then, we need words. Record the text on the bone armor and pass it down from generation to generation. 10 generations, 100 generations, 1,000 generations. Gather all the wisdom and learning in one place for future generations to learn. Then, sooner or later, we will be able to exterminate all the demons and monsters and establish a divine kingdom on earth, a paradise of humanity. The lame shaman's words were like a magnificent painting in front of the little monkey. The little monkey's blood was boiling and his chest was filled with lofty aspirations. He couldn't help but clench his fists. The lame shaman smiled and said, but that day is still far away. You should learn these words first. He seemed to have thought of something and said, also, don't call me Xian Master. It's okay to say it here, but if I were to go to the countries in the wasteland in the future, I would be a laughing stock. Only those who have cultivated to the state of spiritual form and the Tao of Talisman can be called Xian Master. I'm still far away. The little monkey didn't know what spiritual form was and only raised its head to ask, then how should I address you? The lame shaman said, if you're happy, you can call me Elder Mo or Old Man Mo. The little monkey nodded and said, Elder Mo grunted, I won't keep you today. In the future, come and find me at this time every day and I'll teach you how to read words. The little monkey didn't know any etiquette but he followed the rules of the tribe and bowed before leaving with a face full of excitement. After he left, Elder Mo's cloudy eyes became clear and his body emitted a breathtaking aura. One of his legs didn't seem to be limping anymore as he walked steadily to the edge of the cave. Looking at the churning sea under the moon, he thought to himself, a year ago, the great Xian Master observed the stars and predicted that there would be changes in the north of the sea that would affect the southeast. He suspected that there would be another ancient demon in the world. Looking at the changes in the recent days, it seems possible. I'll wait a few more days to see if it's true. Behind him, the bonfire in the cave gradually dimmed. In the following month, the little monkey insisted on learning words every day. He was very intelligent and could remember dozens of words every day, which made Elder Mo very satisfied. He already had the intention to impart the cultivation method to him in advance but due to some considerations, he couldn't make up his mind. In this period of time, the Zhan tribe suffered more and more attacks. The birds and beasts in the forest had long disappeared and there were many unheard of monsters crawling out of the sea and desperately scuttling towards the depths of the land. Every day, there would be huge marine animals stranded on the beach, causing people to tremble in fear. This also made Elder Mo more certain of his guess. However, just a few days later, he shattered this thought. On this day and night, a figure that was tens of thousands of feet tall appeared in the northern sky. Its head was flat and its body was long. It looked like a fish or a lizard with a transparent membrane on its tail. When it floated, there was a resplendent crystal light floating out. Under the moonlight, it was magnificent. When this demon appeared, regardless of whether it was the sea or the land, all the living beings revealed expressions of despair and fear as they trembled. The people of the Zhan tribe were all pressed to the ground as if they were carrying a huge rock on their backs, unable to move. Only Elder Mo was able to stand still. However, his entire body was trembling and his forehead was covered in sweat. So it turns out that the ancient demon who dominates the 6 continents of the North Sea, Great Sage Glass Puppet, has not arrived yet. How dare she invade my eastern wasteland? However, in the next moment, he knew that he was wrong. The demon did not pay attention to them and instead hurriedly headed towards the interior of the eastern wasteland. From the looks of it, it was as if she was also fleeing. Furthermore, there were many bright lines behind her, which were clearly her kin. Elder Mo was dumbstruck. Even the ancient demons were fleeing. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of huge change had occurred in the North Sea. Just as he was making wild guesses, suddenly, a thunderous sound that resounded throughout the entire eastern wasteland exploded above him. It was as if the sky had collapsed. Elder Mo staggered and fell to the ground. He anxiously raised his head to look and saw that in the distant sky, a huge crack had been torn open. Then, a huge shadow that covered the sky slowly passed through. As it arrived, it was as if the entire world was trembling. Chapter 1232. When the giant Kuan's body completely appeared, a vast and majestic aura that seemed to be able to devour the universe immediately enveloped the wasteland. Spiritual vigor shook violently around his body. Lightning circled around him. He was trying to embed the small worlds that he had brought along with him into this world. Following a series of flashes of spiritual light, a rumbling sound rang out, and the small realm gates suddenly opened. Qinsang School, Shaoqing Sect, Pingde Sect, Huanjin Sect, Netherworld Spring Sect, Blood Soul Sect, Jiling Sect, Yuaning Sect, Clear Feather Sect, Lishan Sect, Longzhong Sect, Chongyue True Temple. These Taoist cultivation sects that had risen in the 9 continents had, at this moment, borrowed the power of the giant Kuan to cross over and appear on this wasteland. The 3 mortal molts, close to 30 Taoist masters of the heavenly abode, and millions of cultivators were either flying in the air, riding on boats, riding on rafts, or riding on spiritual birds. They occupied the blue sky and blue sea. For a moment, spiritual light filled the sky, illuminating the ancient wasteland. Clear air swept through the air, rushing into the vast sky. Such a drastic change in spiritual vigor, from the western desolate domain to the eastern wasteland land, from the northern freezing abyss to the southern 100 continents, all the mystic spiritual warriors, great demons, and strange spirits were all shocked. Zhang Yan, sect leader Qin, and Yu Xianshao stood on the head of the Kuan and looked down. Almost as soon as they entered this place, they could feel the almost limitless pure spiritual vigor that enveloped the heavens and earth, and their spirits were lifted. Behind the 3 of them, all the true masters of the grotto heaven sat down cross-legged and breathed in spiritual vigor to replenish their vitality. As for the giant Kuan, it was as if it had just received rain after a long drought. The large holes on its head swallowed the purplish-green energy, and its originally slightly shriveled body also slowly swelled up. Sect leader Qin released his spirit and examined it. He found that this world had a round sky and a square square. It was boundless. Even with his ability, he could not find the end of it. He waved his horsetail whisk and nodded, saying, "This shall be the place to build our foundation." Yu Xianshao sensed it and commented, "It's a little rough. Fortunately, it's vast enough for us to use." Zhang Yan also nodded. Although he didn't know how many years had passed since this world was created, he didn't know how long it had been. However, he could deduce that it should not be as long as the 9 continents. Its spiritual vigor was surging and impetuous, lacking a bit of accumulation, just like that young man. It was the time of its growth. However, to the cultivators of the 9 continents, it was a good thing. In the future, they would not have to worry about the lack of spiritual opportunity. Yu Xianshao said with a smile, "Since there are differences between the 9 continents, why don't we decide on a name here?" Zhang Yan looked around thoughtfully for a moment, then said, "This place is vast and boundless. Why don't we call it the Mountain and Sea Realm?" Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "It's quite fitting." Yu Xianshao said, "Then from now on, we shall call this realm by its name." Zhang Yan suggested, "Sect leader Zhenren, since this place is filled with spiritual opportunity, there should be cultivators here as well. There should be a lot of demons. After the tribulation of man, you have traveled through the void, and your magic power has not recovered yet. To be on the safe side, why don't we set up a restrictive formation to protect our disciples first, then send people to find a suitable place to establish a sect?" Yu Xianshao agreed, "We broke through the realm and made a huge commotion. If there is someone in this realm who can sense the divine connection, it should not be difficult for him to discover our arrival. It won't be difficult for them to discover our arrival in advance, but I still don't know anything about it. I do need to be on guard." When they entered the mountain and sea realm, it was just a moment for them to pass through the heaven and earth gate. However, for the people of this world, there might have been signs dozens or hundreds of years ago. If they were on guard, they could not rule out the possibility of enemies. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "You two are right. The plan now is to find a place to establish a foothold." He gently shook his sleeve. A spiritual light flew out and instantly spread out, turning into a floating island. This was the formation map of the mountain gate of the Butian Pavilion, and it was just the right time to use it. After the formation map was spread out, they temporarily gained a foothold. As for finding the spiritual mountains and rivers and establishing a sect, they could not act rashly before they understood the specific situation of this realm. Yu Xianshao found more than 10 extreme sword cultivators and asked them to go out and investigate, understand the details of this place, and try to find a way to explore the surrounding mountains and rivers. Although Mingquan, Shueshua, and even Hun Cheng's disciples were also skilled in escape techniques, their spirituality was evil and not righteous. Before they understood the specific cultivation methods of the cultivators in this realm, they could not be used. About an hour later, a Shaoqing elder called Qin Yuaning returned. He arrived in front of the three of them and bowed. "Sect Master, I've already inquired about it. This place is called the North Sea's 6 provinces. It's originally under the control of a great demon. However, this demon seems to have sensed our arrival, and has already left with his disciples and grand disciples." Yu Xianshao said, "Did you find out how the people of this realm cultivate?" Qin Yuaning took out a piece of smooth fur from his sleeve and handed it to him. He said, "Disciple obtained this from a great demon's palace. It should be related to that cultivation method." Yu Xianshao took a look and saw many strange words on the fur. They were somewhat similar to the erosion runes. However, at his cultivation realm, as long as he carried the words of Tao and profound theory, he could use his sword heart to identify them, and he could return them to their original form. After reading it, he passed it to sect leader Qin and smiled. "Please take a look." Sect leader Qin took a look and passed it to Zhang Yan. "Hall Master Du Zhen, please take a look." Zhang Yan took it and with just a glance, he could already see it clearly. Strengthening vitality, generating strength, internal strengthening, opening aperture, spiritual form. This is not the end of the teachings, there should be a follow-up method, but it is not written in this book. Although this type of cultivation method has its merits, it is slightly messy and rough. It seems to be a combination of qi, strength, and dharma, with some witchcraft mixed in. Sect leader Qin nodded. "That's not surprising. The cultivation method of the 9 continents was like this a million years ago. It's just that after a long time, branches and leaves grew from the trunk, dividing the 3 daos." Zhang Yan nodded. The cultivation method of the 9 continents was first developed by the ancestors when they fought against demons. It was to hone their qi and strengthen their muscles and bones. The next step was to learn from heaven and earth, to observe all things in nature, to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and the essence of the sun and moon. The people of the mountain and sea realm should be the same. However, from this, it seemed that they hadn't broken away from ignorance for too long. However, he didn't look down on the cultivators of this realm. After all, this cultivation method was the accumulation of wisdom from generation to generation. It might not be the best, but it was very suitable for the heaven and earth. At this time, he suddenly had a sudden impulse, as if there was some kind of karma involved. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, perform an incantation gesture, and use his divine will to calculate for a moment. Then he smiled, exchanged a few words with sect leader Qin, and sent out a beam of spiritual light to summon his 9th disciple, Yuan Jianqing. He said, "Master remembers that you've been cultivating for more than 300 years, but you haven't accepted a single disciple." Yuan Jianqing bowed and said, "Yes, Master, thank you for your concern. It's my fault." Normally, disciples of the Qinsang school who reached the core transformation stage should have accepted disciples. However, he had spent his early years cultivating in Donglai, and later came to the Eastern Flower Realm. After arriving at the clear nether heavenly lake, he was completely focused on cultivating, and didn't care about the outside world. Even some of the younger disciples didn't know where he came from, so the matter had naturally been delayed. Zhang Yan smiled, raised his finger and drew an ancient rune in the air, then said, "Go 90,000 miles to the south and find a man with this Lu character in his surname. Find a way to take him as your disciple." Yuan Jianqing didn't ask for the specific reason. He bowed, then flew up into the air. Not long after, he felt that the escape light was much faster than usual. He thought to himself, in this world, it seems that the methods I can use are a bit more powerful than when I was in the 9 continents. It should be because of the abundance of spiritual opportunity here. After adjusting his qi, he followed his master's instructions and headed south. He was very cautious. He knew that there were demonic cultivators in this world, so he was afraid of running into any accidents. Along the way, whenever he saw traces of people, he would get off the divine shuttle and shine the spiritual light into their minds. In an instant, he saw all their life experiences. However, perhaps because this world was too vast, these people who were trapped in a corner all year round couldn't even speak fluently. What they knew was just some strange stories in the mountains. In the end, they only learned the local language and customs. However, he could travel hundreds of thousands of kilometers in an instant. Usually, when he reached the next place, it would be a different language, so it wasn't very useful to him. After traveling for an hour, he couldn't see any continents anymore. There was only a vast ocean. However, he didn't stop. In a flash, he headed south. At this moment, in the Sea Cliff Shan tribe, Elder Mo sensed the changes in the northern celestial phenomenon. He knew that something big had happened. He didn't dare to stay in the tribe for long. He decided to return to the country immediately and report everything to the Grand Xian Master. He originally wanted to bring the little monkey along with him. However, due to the urgency of the matter, he needed to use the floating technique. The little monkey might not be able to withstand the astral winds in the sky. After hesitating for a while, he decided to leave it behind. He took out a torch. With just a shake, a cluster of sparks flew out and floated out. He then followed the little monkey. As the ancient demon had just left not long ago, the Zhan tribe was in a state of panic and chaos. He didn't care about it and quickly found Zhan Lu's residence. When Zhan Lu saw him, he was very surprised and said, "Elder Mo, why are you here?" Elder Mo said solemnly, "Zhan Lu, I have something important to do and need to leave. Take this." He took off a necklace with a bone piece on it and stuffed it into his hand. He said, "Do you still remember the words I taught you?" Zhan Lu nodded his head vigorously. Elder Mo Daoran said, "Good. When you can read these words smoothly and carve them into your heart, you will be able to understand the meaning of the bone piece. At that time, you can come to Shenfang country to look for me. I will impart to you the art of Xian cultivation." After these few days of teaching, Zhan Lu's horizons had been broadened. When he heard that, his eyes lit up. He grabbed his sleeve and said, "Elder Mo, you are a Xian cultivator. You are a Xian cultivator, right?" Elder Mo snorted and nodded his head to admit, "I am a Xian cultivator." He reached out and touched Zhan Lu's head. "Remember, if anyone asks about your teachings, say that you are a student of Black Cloak Platform." After that, a cloud of smoke rose from his body and brought him out of the cave, floating towards the sky. Zhan Lu couldn't help but widen his eyes and ran out. He saw the smoke quickly disappear into the night sky. He grabbed the bone piece tightly. On his small face, there was determination in his eyes. He seemed to have made up his mind. Chapter 1233. After Elder Mo left, he opened up his acupoints and stimulated the blood qi in his body. In a split second, the pattern carved on his body by the country's Xian teachers seemed to come to life. It turned into a red glow and wrapped around him. He suddenly broke through the clouds and flew towards a direction with unparalleled speed. A day later, he returned to Shenfang country, which was thousands of miles away. At this moment, the pattern had already dimmed. The original bright color had turned gray, as though his body was covered with a layer of dust. He sighed, this talisman inscription fruit is a good item. Just now, my flying speed is comparable to that of a spiritual Xian cultivator. This time, I will definitely be able to obtain quite a bit of blood medicine before everyone else. Should I try to inscribe some more on me next time? But when he thought of the Xian teachers in Pure Wind Academy and the price they had to pay, he couldn't help but sigh, there are still too few Xian teachers in my Black Cloak platform. Otherwise, I can ask them to help me. In Shenfang country, there were 4 major academies, namely the Black Robe stage, the Plain Wind stage, the Plucking stage, and the War stage. Each academy had a great mystic cultivator in charge, but each had a different role. The Black Robe stage was good at assassination and investigation, the War stage was good at fighting and killing, the Plucking stage was good at studying medicine, and the Plain Wind stage was good at drawing talismans. The 4 academies weren't separated. There were Xian teachers in Black Cloak platform too. However, most of them were kept by the palace master, and ordinary students wouldn't be able to see them. Just as he was thinking, a huge city appeared in front of him. This city stood on the plains of Pingyang. Its back was against the moat, and its south was against the white water. The palaces were majestic and huge. There were 6 hills and 8 ponds in the city, as well as 13 large platforms. Outside the city, there were countless Li palaces. He didn't enter the city. After taking a few glances, his body slowly floated down and arrived in front of a Li palace. At this point, there was no longer any need for him to conceal his identity. He moved out the blood qi that was originally hidden deep within his marrow. His eyes turned from turbid to clear, and his withered white hair slowly turned back to black. His skinny figure also gradually became plump and tall. All of this happened in an instant. In an instant, he was still in the prime of his life. The attendant at the door saw him and bowed, "Student Wen is back." Wen was his original name, and Mo referred to his studies at the Black Garment platform. Only after reaching the orifice opening state could one be called a student. But even then, one would not be a palace master and would not be able to teach on stage. He would still be a student servant. Maoan took out the token and showed it to him. He then entered the Li Palace, walked past the front court, ascended the steps, and took off his shoes. A maid came over and led him to a pool of hot water. First, he combed his hair and removed the tattoos, then he used medicinal water to peel off the layers of tattoos on his body. Afterwards, he bathed and changed into a black gown. At this time, there were attendants leading the way. He was brought to the front of a stone pavilion. The bricks and stones on the ground here were polished and smooth, and there were dozens of golden bird pecking the sun, braziers hanging on the ceiling, illuminating the golden ponds on both sides abnormally bright. The front was actually a large lacquer wall, on which was painted the wind star mysterious dragon. At this point, his expression turned solemn. He clasped his hands together and bowed, saying, "School's ink text. I have received an imperial order to leave the sect. My armor has returned to the order. Respectfully, please examine it." He raised an exquisitely polished piece of armor high up in the air, and someone immediately came forward to receive it. After passing by a stone screen, the piece of armor was hung on a large wall. It could be seen that there was a large diagram of a tortoise shell there, made up of thousands of pieces of armor strung together. However, at this moment, there were still dozens of pieces missing on one corner. Maoan waited for a while. An elder in a black robe walked in front of him. He couldn't help but raise his head to take a look, then hurriedly bowed and said, "School's ink text greets Palace Teacher Jie." The elder's expression was solemn, and he said, "School's ink text, you are the first person to return to hand in the order. The palace teacher wants to see you. Follow me." As he said this, he turned around and left. Maoan's body trembled, and he bowed. "Yes." He hurriedly took a few steps and followed the elder's footsteps. A day passed. In the sky above the eastern wasteland's North Sea, floating islands and flying peaks with palaces and halls had already risen, surrounding the heaven-mending formation. These things were all brought over from the East Flower continent by the many small sects of East Flower, and they had the right to use them as a place to stay. Although the cultivation of this group of cultivators was not high, with the heaven-mending formation behind them, they were not afraid of being attacked by external enemies. Zhang Yan sat in a hall. As the dozen or so Shaoqing disciples returned, he had already gradually gained some understanding of the surrounding situation. This world was also a barren land, where humans, demons, and monsters were everywhere, and there were innumerable strange creatures. The place under his feet was called the Eastern Wasteland. Just this place alone was several times larger than the 9 continents, and after heading east to the sea, there seemed to be no end. In this desolate land, the various countries of the human path only curled up in a small area and lived. Most of them were occupied by demons and monsters. There were even a few tribes that were similar to humans, and they treated humans as livestock and slaves. Every once in a while, they would charge into the various countries of the Eastern Wasteland to plunder wantonly. Fortunately, the various countries had the support of those mystic cultivators, and they were not completely powerless to fight back. In most situations, they could gain the upper hand against a certain foreign race. However, because the number of foreign races far exceeded that of the 100 countries, some of the feudal lords in the outer borders had no choice but to marry with the foreign races to quell the war. And that was only on the surface. In the Eastern Wasteland, there were many ancient demons and great sages. If such great demons came to stir up trouble, the various countries of the Eastern Wasteland could just barely stop them. However, if there were too many mystic cultivators in the countries, not to mention fighting with the foreign races, they might even be annexed by other countries. Therefore, they would offer a small sacrifice to these demons every 100 years, and a big sacrifice every 1,000 years. All they wanted was stability. All in all, the countries of the human path in the mountain and sea realm were on the weaker side, and could even be in danger of being destroyed at any time. They could not be compared to the 9 continents. He thought for a moment, then thought, perhaps we can start from here. He gathered his divine will and discussed it with the 2 sect masters Qin and Yu. After a moment, he retreated and instructed his subordinates, invite Spiritual Master Ning, Tao Zhenren, and Spiritual Master Wen of the Blood Soul sect here. Not long after, Ning Chongxian, Tao Zhenhong, and Wen Qingxiang came into the pagoda. After greeting them, Zhang Yan invited them to take a seat and threw 3 jade scrolls to them. He said, these contain the general situation of the Eastern Wasteland. Please take a look. After the 3 of them looked at it, Ning Chongxian said, Hall Master summoned me here, so you must have a countermeasure. What should I do later? Zhang Yan smiled and said, after all, the cultivators of the 9 continents came from another world. We are not natives of this place. If we invade the land as soon as we arrive, we will inevitably become the enemy of the living beings of this world. If we can form a good relationship with one side, we can gain a righteous reputation, and it will be much more convenient for us in the future. Tao Zhenren said, does Spiritual Master want to form a good relationship with the countries of the Eastern Wasteland? Zhang Yan nodded and said, the demons and monsters are different. They are innately incompatible with me, but they occupy more than half of the territory of the Eastern Wasteland. If I want to rebuild my sect here, I can't avoid them. The cultivators of the 9 continents and the countries of the Eastern Wasteland are of the same race. If we can get help from each other, it will be beneficial for both sides. However, I am not familiar with the countries of the Eastern Wasteland. If I go looking for them rashly, they will be suspicious and won't let me go easily. The 3 of them agreed. If they were in the 9 continents, if someone came from the outer world, even if they did not say anything, they would be cautious. Back then, the cultivators of the outer world had to go through several debates and stay for hundreds and thousands of years before they were gradually accepted by the cultivators of the West continent. Zhang Yan looked at the 3 of them and said, so if I want to form a good relationship with them, I need to show my sincerity first. Ning Chongxian pondered, a cold light appeared in his eyes and said, ancient demons. Zhang Yan nodded with a smile and said, if I can send an ancient demon, the countries of the Eastern Wasteland will show my sincerity. He shook his sleeve and 3 talismans floated out. This is the place of the two ancient demons in the eastern wasteland. The three of you can try to get them. Speaking of this, he looked at the three of them and said, the ability of the ancient demons is not below that of the ordinary grotto heaven cultivators. The three of you have not fully recovered your mana. If you need to borrow any enchanted weapons for this battle, you can tell me first. I can find a way to transfer them. Ning Chongxian and Tao Zhenren did not say anything. They had their own enchanted weapons and did not need to bring more. When Qingxiang cupped his hands and said, Hallmaster Zhang, can you grant me the blood god waterfall? Zhang Yan did not refuse. With a wave of his sleeve, a blood light gushed out and said, Zhenren Wen, this treasure can be returned to your Shuashua sect first. I hope you can put in effort in this matter. This treasure could only be used by the Shuashua sect and was useless to him. Now that the Shuashua sect and the demon sect were both cultivators of the 9 continents, they needed to work together against external enemies. If he returned it, it could play a greater role. When Qingxiang thanked him and said solemnly, I dare not do my best. Zhang Yan said indifferently, the 2 sect masters are collecting the purple pure spiritual vigor above the firmament. If the 3 of you can do this well, you will be rewarded. The 3 of them were excited. The purple pure spiritual vigor was used by mortal metamorphosis cultivators for daily cultivation. If it was refined by them, it could be used by the grotto heaven cultivators. If they could get this chi from time to time, their cultivation progress would be much faster. At this point, Zhang Yan had already explained everything that needed to be said. He raised his hand and the 3 of them stood up and bowed before taking their leave. After arranging this matter, he was free for the time being and began to think about his own cultivation. Although his strength path was now at the 6th transformation realm, he would not give up on chi path because of this. There was an inexhaustible amount of pure purple spiritual vigor here, it was easy for him to use the 6th transformation realm of strength path to absorb this chi. He believed that he would soon be able to break through the later barriers and cultivate to the nascent embryo realm. The road to mortal transformation could be said to be extremely smooth. When he reached the mortal metamorphosis realm, if the purple pure spiritual vigor was scarce, he could live up to 9,000 years. But if the chi was abundant, it was not difficult to live up to 10,000 years. That was why the prayers of the junior disciples had the saying, long live 10,000 years. As for going further up, while he was thinking, suddenly there was a rumble of thunder outside, and then there was a heavy downpour. This was the first time he saw rain in this world. It was indeed a barren land. The rain was like the water of the 4 seas pouring down. His eyes flashed. The countries of the eastern wilderness not only had to resist the demons and foreign races, but also had to face the natural wali from time to time. The pressure of survival was unimaginable. But this was not necessarily a bad thing. The alliance might be easier to achieve than he had thought. Chapter 1234. Maoan followed Palace Master Jia out of the stone pavilion, but he did not go outside. Instead, he turned into a secret pavilion and went straight underground. After an unknown amount of time, a stone door opened in front of him. With a rumbling sound, the torches on both sides lit up, illuminating a spacious hall. There were copper pillars with ghost patterns erected all around. Palace Master Jia said, "Wait here," and walked towards the inner hall. Mo Wen was still standing there, not daring to move. After a while, a man with a long beard walked out from the side hall corridor. His hair was loose and his feet were bare. His skin was fair and his face was strong. His eyes were deep and his eyes were like the sword gleam of the night. It was extremely piercing. Jia Gong Shishir was following behind him with his head lowered. Mo Wen recognized that this person was Grand Palace Master Mo Du. He hurriedly followed the etiquette, bowed 3 times and put his palms together in front of him. He said respectfully, "Student Mo Wen pays respect to Grand Palace Master." The Grand Palace Master was the grand mystic cultivator of the country. His ability was enough to fight with the ancient demons. Among the 4 major academies, the Black Garment stage was ranked last, but it had always been the most trusted by the monarch. This Grand Palace Master was a member of the Duke. In front of this person, he did not dare to address himself as a student. He could only call himself student servant. Mo Du sat down in front of the platform, his expression rather amiable as he said, "You are the first to return, so you must have borrowed the help of the diagram. This shows that you are more diligent than others." Mo Wen said, "I dare not accept the Grand Palace Master's praise." Mo Du made a sound of acknowledgement and stretched out his hand to press on the corner of the table. He looked straight at him and said, "Tell me in detail about what you have obtained from the outer appearance of the sea border." Mo Wen agreed. He had been in the occupation department for a whole year, so he skipped over the details and picked out the important ones. After Mo Du heard it, he said thoughtfully, "You said that the huge fish flying in the sky seemed to be controlled by someone?" Mo Wen said with certainty, "Yes." The student used the mirror basin bestowed upon him to look at it, and vaguely saw a few blurry human figures on top of the big fish's head. Just now, after looking at it for a moment, the mirror basin cracked by itself, and the life-protecting sun markings on the student's body all cracked. "There's nothing left." Palace Master Jia cupped his hands and said, "Grand Palace Master, that mirror basin was made by Jia Xian." Mo Du's expression turned solemn as he said, "An item made by such a great craftsman. Even ancient demons can be seen from afar, but I can't see the appearance of a human. Could it be that he has already reached that realm?" Palace Master Jia was shocked and said, "This, Grand Palace Master is saying." Mo Du waved his hand. Stopping him from continuing, he turned to look at Mo Wen and said, "Just now, you said that you met a child in the Zhan division who was illiterate. But after seeing him for the first time, he was able to memorize 70 to 80% of the 100-character study?" Mo Wen bowed and said, "Yes." The servant saw that he was a promising talent, so he gave the magical bone to him. Mo Du said, "You have mishandled this matter." Mo Wen was terrified. Leaning down, he hit his forehead on the ground and said, "It was the study servant who acted on his own." Mo Du shook his head and said, "I am not talking about this, but you did not bring him back." Mo Wen couldn't help but be stunned. Mo Du sighed and said, 7 to 8 years old and able to memorize more than 80% of the 100-character study, such talent is rare even in the plain wind platform. If we can nurture him well, he will definitely become a Xian teacher in the future, and my black garment platform will have less constraints. For such a talent, even if you came 2 days later, what can you do?" Mo Wen was even more terrified and said, "It is the study servant who has mishandled." Palace Master Jia explained from the side, "Grand Palace Master. The study servant is also wholeheartedly for the academy." Mo Du said, "I have always been clear about rewards and punishments. Mo Wen has done a good job this time, so he can be rewarded with double the amount of blood medicine. But for losing a talent, the punishment will be reduced by half." "When will he be found?" Mo Wen said solemnly, "Thank you Grand Palace Master for your reward. The study servant will move now, and if I do not find that child, I will not return to the palace." When he finished, he gave a heavy kowtow. Mo Du looked at Palace Master Jia and the latter nodded. He walked to the side and pushed open a secret door, saying, "Follow me." Mo Wen bowed again and retreated with Palace Master Jia. After the two of them retreated, a person came out from behind the stone screen. He was in his 30s, had a short beard, and his footsteps were steady. This person was Shinfang country's young master, Shu Qi. Because the country's king was old, he was not in the mood to take care of the country's affairs, so the country's authority had long been in his hands. He stroked his beard and said, "Grand Palace Master, do you think that the thing that came from beyond the heavens is that fierce creature?" Mo Du thought about it and shook his head, saying, "It doesn't seem like it. Rumor has it that the fierce creature is cruel and vicious, and it comes once every 10,000 years. It has only been 7,000 years, so it shouldn't come at this time. 7,000 years ago was when the Eastern Barren Divine Kingdom was at its peak. However, in the records, there was a fierce creature that came from beyond the heavens. The Divine Kingdom's Grand Priest, Gonggong Tua, led the people to face the enemy. Rumor had it that after a great battle, although Gonggong Tua managed to repel the creature, he was severely injured. After his death, the Divine Kingdom fell apart. Master Shui smiled and said, "You're right. Moreover, this is just a rumor. Some parts are too bizarre. No one can be sure if that fierce creature really exists or not. Even if it is true, isn't the country of human Tao still existing? So it's nothing much." Mo Du's expression was serious. Even if it isn't that fierce creature, the person who came cannot be underestimated. It is very likely that he has also reached that level. Master Shui was shocked. "Is that possible?" Mo Du said plainly, "The person who came could break this heaven and earth, which is similar to the records from 7,000 years ago. Moreover, there might be more than one person who came this time." Above the spiritual form was the mystic enlightenment. At this level, one could be called a great mystic scholar. This was also the origin of the name mystic scholar. However, above this, there was actually another realm. At that realm, one could try to go above the heavens and catch a strand of 9 heavens purple chi. After swallowing it with elixirs, one could travel above the sun and moon, and ride a boat in the Milky Way. Rumor had it that Gonggang Tua had this ability back then. However, after thousands of years, no great mystic scholar could cross this barrier. The smile on Master Shui's face slowly disappeared, and he frowned. He thought for a while and said, "There was a strange phenomenon in the sky yesterday. I wonder what the Eastern Barren Kingdom said." The Gong family of the Eastern Barren Kingdom was the descendant of the Celestial Kingdom. Thus, all the countries in the Eastern Barren Kingdom addressed them as the Upper Kingdom. However, after thousands of years, many vassal states gradually rose up, and in terms of national power, they were not much weaker. For example, the Xinfang Kingdom imitated the ancient scholarly system and set up the learning platform system. There were tens of thousands of mystic scholars in the country. In addition, in these hundreds of years, they had also annexed many small countries. Their territory was much larger than the Eastern Barren Kingdom, and they were like a big country in the south. Thus, their words were not that polite. Mo Du took out a piece of silk and said, "Most of the Eastern Barren Kingdom's discussion is here. You can take a look." Master Shui took it and looked at it with interest. He sneered, "What do you mean by telling all countries that without a clear order, they are not allowed to communicate with outsiders? Do they really think that this is the time when the Celestial Kingdom controls humanity?" Mo Du said plainly, "What do you think?" Master Shui's face was filled with disdain. What does the Xinfang Kingdom's actions have to do with the Eastern Barren Kingdom? They can't control me. Great Palace Master, you can send a capable person to investigate the background of those outsiders. Mo Du shook his head and said, "If you insist, then I can only go personally. No one else can do it." In that case. Master Shui thought for a while and agreed, "That's fine. I can only be at ease if you go. But you must meet with them before the Eastern Barren Kingdom's envoy." He was not acting on impulse. He felt that if those outsiders had ill intentions, then the countries of the Eastern Barren Kingdom would not be able to hide from them. However, if they could sit down and discuss, as the first vassal state to make contact with them, they would definitely gain great benefits. He believed that the Eastern Barren Kingdom also had the same idea. They were probably trying to stabilize the other countries while sending envoys. He would not let this opportunity slip from his hands. Mo Du stood up, clasped his hands, and bowed. He said, "I understand. Make some preparations. We will depart in 2 hours." Master Shui took a step back and returned the bow. He said solemnly, "Then I'll leave it to you, Great Palace Master." In the Zhan tribe, there was a cacophony of battle cries. More than 1,000 strong tribesmen stood on the veranda, and under the command of the old chief, they kept hurling sharpened stone javelins down, knocking down the demons that were climbing up the walls. Every time a demon fell to the ground, it would be swarmed by the other demons and torn to shreds in an instant. However, this was of no use. There was still an endless stream of demons climbing up from below. A Ding Zhuang hurried over and said anxiously, "Chief, the spears are running out." The old chief was very calm and said, "There are stones on the cliff. I've already ordered the women in the tribe to polish them. Moreover, These demons are from the sea and can't stay on land for long. Just hold on a little longer. When noon comes, they won't be able to stand the sun and will naturally retreat. Ding Zhuang felt that what he said made sense and was infected by his calmness. Instantly, his confidence increased. He wiped the sweat off his face and shouted before running back. However, no one realized that there was a trace of haze in the old chief's eyes. Although the demons were fierce, they usually prioritized self-preservation. No matter how hungry they would never be so fearless of death. Furthermore, the demons in front of them were not from one tribe, but several. This was even more unusual. It was very likely that there was a demon leader driving them from behind. He sighed inwardly, looks like the tribe can't hold on much longer. Fortunately, June has been sent out just now. Even if all the people in the tribe die, I'll buy him enough time. At this moment, Zhan Lu was carefully lying on top of a large rock and looking down. After receiving Mo Wenyue's teachings, he was like a completely different person from a month ago. His knowledge was far above that of the Zhan tribe. He knew that the situation in front of him was very wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. He looked around anxiously. After a long time, his body suddenly trembled and his eyes widened. He saw a pair of fierce eyes hidden in the waves far away, looking at him with a trace of mockery and cruelty. He hurriedly lay down, his heart thumping non-stop. Although he didn't know what it was, he could feel that he could lose his life if he stayed in the tribe. The best thing to do was to leave this place as soon as possible. In the past, he would never have dared to have such a thought. But right now, it was very natural for him to think about it. He knew that there was a soft ladder behind the cliff. Normally, it was hidden in the frog's belly vine. As long as he smeared a medicinal liquid on his body, he would be able to retreat in times of danger. However, the frog's belly vine had almost been completely eaten by the birds in the past month. He was confident that he could slip away without the medicinal liquid. However, he still had an older sister who was serving the old chief. He didn't want to leave alone, so he secretly climbed up to the top of the cliff. Luckily, no one noticed a child like him. Just as the battle between the humans and the demons was getting intense, thousands of miles away, a man in black robes with a cold expression was flying through the air, stepping on the strong wind as he approached. Chapter 1235. The place where the old chief lived usually required a large eagle to go up and down. However, this was only a bird after all, so it was not completely reassuring. Therefore, there were many round holes left on the cliff walls. When necessary, one only needed to insert a wooden wedge to climb up and down. Zhan Lu had secretly come here to visit his sister many times before, so he was familiar with the route. Although his body was small and skinny, he was only slightly shorter than the old and frail clan leader. He was also very agile, so he didn't need to use a wooden wedge at all. He just dug into the stone hole and climbed up. Just as he was about to reach the top, he placed his hand on a protruding edge, exerted his strength, and slipped into a stone crevice. The stone crevice was more than 100 feet wide, but it was only as wide as an adult's shoulder. He had to use both his hands and feet to climb the holes on both sides. After 100 breaths, he reached the stone cave and poked his head out from below. At this moment, the maids on the cliff were also restless. They couldn't help but jump in fright when they saw a head suddenly pop out. When they saw that it was him, they heaved a sigh of relief and rebuked, "So it's this little monkey. You scared us to death." The moment Zhan Lutsai came up, he looked around with wide eyes and asked, "Where is sister?" "Looking for your sister," a slightly older woman smiled and pulled him up, patted the dust on his body and said, "Your sister was chosen by the shaman to be his personal attendant, she has been out for half a day." Another female servant said enviously, "Little monkey, you're so lucky. Xiaoying has become the high priest's servant and can live a good life. Poor us, on the other hand, have to serve that old man all day long." "Sister left with the shaman? Why didn't you tell me?" Zhan Lu mumbled. After all, he was still young and had the temperament of a child. He didn't have that many complicated emotions. Since his sister had left, it was better for him to leave earlier. He looked up. He said seriously, "Those demons are coming up soon. Sisters, you should leave quickly." Most of these maids were already 18 or 19 years old, and they found it very funny to see a child speaking with such a serious expression. The slightly older one came up and patted his head, saying, "Little monkey, don't be afraid. With the old patriarch leading the people to deal with the demons, it should be fine." Jean-Loup still wanted to say something, but suddenly there was a commotion below, and then he heard a mournful scream. The maidservants glanced at each other and cautiously walked over. They stretched their necks to take a look, and their faces immediately turned deathly pale. One of the younger girls among them even let out a cry of alarm. He saw a strange red-crowned bird pouncing on the eagle, pressing it to the ground. At this moment, it was using its slightly curved beak to peck at flesh, leaving broken feathers and blood everywhere. There were still 2 other strange birds circling on the side, but due to the might of the red-crowned strange bird, they didn't dare to go up and fight for it. At this moment, a cry of alarm came from above, startling them. 2 pairs of eyes immediately stared over, and with a caw, they circled around. He rushed up. The cavern hall above was spacious and couldn't block the 2 strange birds at all. One of them was incomparably ferocious. Just now, it rushed in and grabbed a waitress with its mouth. The rest of the waitresses immediately screamed and fled. These women's bodies had been smeared with the juice made from boiling herbs for a long time, and the fragrance was fragrant. It originally covered the smell of their bodies very well. If they didn't make any sound, the strange bird wouldn't have discovered them even if it was close at hand. But that cry of alarm exposed them. At this moment, the other strange bird also leaped up. The claw-hoe raised its wings, and the hair on its head stood up. It cawed at the scene, and the waitresses felt as if they had been hit heavily in the head. All of them bled from their mouths and noses, and fell to the ground. Jean-Loup also felt dizzy, but at this moment, the necklace with the bone piece hanging on his neck flashed, and he immediately sobered up. He rolled on the ground, and leaped into the rocky peak that just now came up from. Above him was dark, and there was the sound of flapping wings, and a gust of fishy wind drifted down. Then, the strange bird stuck its head in, and almost hooked him. However, this rocky peak was narrow, and its huge body couldn't squeeze in at all. So, it flapped its wings again, and tried to find a larger gap on the outside to squeeze in. Although Jean-Loup was very afraid, he didn't give up on survival, and did everything possible to stick to the rock wall. After the strange bird tried many times to no avail, it screeched angrily. Its 2 sharp claws clasped onto the rock, and it used its sharp beak to peck at the rocks at the side, causing gravel to fly everywhere. It seemed to be trying to force a passageway through. However, the rocks on the outside had been eroded by wind and rain for a long time, and were somewhat loose. The inside was very hard, and it couldn't be broken in a short time. This monster tried to stick its head in a few times, but it was just a little bit away from touching Jean-Loup. This demon bird was called Seizing Horn, and it had always been greedy and unintelligent. It would often stare at a target, and even though the waitresses outside were enough to fill its stomach, it still wouldn't let go of the moving prey in front of it. At this moment, Jean-Loup had nowhere to go. There was still a strange bird above him, and there was a cliff below him, so he could only stay here obediently. Thus, the man and the bird were in a deadlock here. Yuan Jianqing was already close to the place where the cliff was located. He released his spirit shuttle to investigate, and within a radius of several thousand miles, this was the only place where the tribe was gathered. However, at this moment, the entire Zhan tribe had already been breached, and it was a scene of chaos from afar. Many monsters were gnawing on the rock wall, and he couldn't help but frown. His gaze shifted downwards, and a vast aura surged. All the monsters first stiffened, and then they all fled in terror. He flicked his sleeve, and a cloud of black mist flashed past. A delicate and pretty boy came out, and he bowed and said, "Master." Yuan Jianqing said coldly, "If one runs away after cleaning it up, I'll hold you responsible." The boy responded, and with a sway of his body, he transformed into a black-scaled black jiao that was 6 feet long, and chased after the monsters. Yuan Jingqing swept his gaze again, and suddenly noticed that there seemed to be some weak aura at the side of the cliff. He leaped up, and saw a child hiding in a crevice of the cliff. He retracted his aura into his body, and with a sweep of his mana, he brought the child up. Zhan Lu only felt his vision blur, and he felt that he was already moved to the top. He saw a person in a black robe standing in front of him, and his hair was tied up in a bun. His skin was like jade, and his gaze was unusually sharp. It seemed like he wasn't easy to get close to him, and he couldn't help but feel a little afraid. Yuan Jingqing asked, "You're from this tribe?" Zhan Lu nodded, and he looked around. He saw broken limbs and bodies everywhere, and it was a bloody mess. Yuan Jingqing said, "There's no need to look. When I arrived, you were the only one left alive in this tribe. It wasn't easy for the Zhan tribe to survive, and there were people dying almost every day. Life and death were common, and Zhan Lu was used to it since he was young. However, now that he heard that he was the only one left, his heart felt empty and sad. He raised his head and asked, "Sir, are you a mystic cultivator?" Yuan Jingqing was slightly surprised. After this journey, he also knew that mystic cultivators were the cultivators in this realm. However, this was something that only the leaders of the tribe knew about, and now a child actually knew about it. It was obvious that his background wasn't simple. "I'm not a mystic cultivator, what's your name?" Zhan Lu saw that he wasn't a mystic cultivator, and couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He didn't want to say his name, so he lowered his head and said, "They all call me Little Monkey." Yuan Jingqing said, "If they call you that, then what's your real name?" Zhan Lu rolled his eyes and said, "I'm Zhan Gun." Yuan Jingqing said plainly, "Your voice is high-pitched, your gaze is erratic, and you don't have much confidence. Maybe there really is such a person, but you're definitely not him." If he wanted to investigate someone, the simplest way was to use the shuttle to shine into the person's heart. However, seeing that Zhan Lu was young, he was afraid that doing so would hurt his spirit, so he didn't do it. Zhan Lu still wanted to say something, but Yuan Jingqing suddenly looked down. "Is there anyone in your tribe with the word Lu in their surname?" Zhan Lu was pierced by that gaze, and his little face tightened as he shook his head repeatedly. Yuan Jingqing said, "The people in your tribe are almost all dead, and there's no need for you to deny that there are people who escaped. Therefore, this person is most likely you. Your tribe is named after the Zhan family, are you called Zhan Lu?" Zhan Lu said loudly, "Not me." Yuan Jingqing was even more certain. He scanned Zhan Lu from head to toe, and suddenly, something flew out from Zhan Lu's body and floated in midair. It was a shell, and there was an ancient rune on it, which was exactly the same as what Zhang Yan had shown. Yuan Jingqing knew that he had found the right person, but he wouldn't argue with a child, so he said, "Kneel down and acknowledge me as your master." Zhan Lu turned and ran. Yuan Jingqing, however, stood still and watched him leave. Zhan Lu climbed down from the cliff, and used the rope to slide down the cliff. He ran towards the forest at the back of the cliff, and even fell a few times along the way, but he still gritted his teeth and stood up. After all, his mind was simple, and in his panic, he didn't think about whether he could escape or not. Just now, he had been confronting the demons for a long time, and he was already tired. He didn't eat much, and his body didn't have much strength. After running for a short distance, he started to pant. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in his ears, "It's useless for you to run like this, and it's just using brute force. Do as I say, your body is like a bridge connecting heaven and earth, and your breath is clear and turbid, turning yin and yang." Zhan Lu could only feel the words being stuffed into his head, and he unconsciously did as he was told. He felt a gust of hot air pouring down from the top of his head. At first it was a small wisp, and then it became more and more. Soon, the hot air flowed through his limbs and bones, and his breathing actually calmed down. He felt like he was immersed in a pool of warm water, and he gradually forgot himself. When he woke up, he found himself lying in a dense forest. Sunlight shone down from between the branches and leaves, and shone on his body. It looked like a day had passed. He turned his head, and realized that there was a huge, ferocious demon head lying not far from him. He was instantly shocked, and he crawled up with a grunt, and retreated backwards. A voice came from behind, "You're awake." Jean Lu turned his head, and saw that the black-robed man from yesterday was standing not far from him. Beside him stood a child about his age, and the child was looking at him with a curious gaze. Yuan Jianqing said, "This demon is the culprit behind the attack on your village yesterday, and I've already killed it." "I've already killed it. Are you willing to come with me?" Jean Lu still shook his head. Yuan Jianqing asked calmly, "Why?" Jean Lu grabbed the bone piece hanging on his neck, and raised it up high, and said, "I'm a student of Black Cloak Platform." "You're not a mystic cultivator. I want to be a mystic cultivator." "Mystic cultivator?" Yuan Jianqing thought for a while, and said, "Where is Black Cloak Platform that you mentioned?" Jean Lu didn't know where it was, and he only said according to Mo Wen's words, Shenfang country. Yuan Jianqing nodded, and said, "All right, I'll go take a look, and see what kind of tricks this mystic cultivator that you mentioned actually has." Chapter 1236. Eastern Wastelands 8 Drum Mountain. Ning Chongxian, Tao Zhenhong, and Wen Qingxiang appeared at the top of the mountain. Looking down at the valley with strange rocks and almost no vegetation, Ning Chongxian said, "According to the map given by Sage Zhang, this is where the ancient demon is." According to the records in the Jade Slip, to become an ancient demon, one had to be at least 3,000 years old. Moreover, ancient demons were somewhat similar to heavenly demons. They were also favored by the heavens and earth. They didn't need to cultivate to possess magical powers, and after a long time, they would naturally become almighty. The three of them knew about the abilities of heavenly demons, especially since Tao Zhenren had fought with the Jasper Heavenly Centipede. If the latter was not at its peak, they would definitely not be able to deal with it. Therefore, they didn't dare to underestimate it. When the three of them came, they had concealed their auras. Even if someone of the same generation was here, it would be difficult to detect them within 50 kilometers. This was not to facilitate a surprise attack, but because they knew that ancient demons also sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. If they scared them away, it would be much more troublesome to deal with them later. Ning Chongxian glanced at them and said, "According to the rumors, the original form of this demon is a demonic insect. After becoming an ancient demon, it called itself the Cloud-Swallowing Great Sage. As for what abilities it has, I don't know. Let's test it out first." Tao Zhenren cupped his hands and said, "Let I give it a try." In the 9 continents, he could identify more than 90% of the strange birds and beasts, and could even tell their origins and strengths. But in the mountain and sea realm, his previous experience was not enough. He took out the origin diagram of the walking beasts and placed it on his arm. The diagram unfurled in an instant, and with a flick of his finger, a crimson ape leaped out. Its eyes rolled wildly, and it leaped toward the valley. Only then did it reach the valley. Suddenly, a ferocious mouth appeared out of thin air. It was so large that it almost occupied the entire valley. The scarlet ape's soul essence was swallowed before it could even react. Then, the mouth swayed for a moment before it disappeared. Although it was only for a moment, the three of them could already see many things. Ning Chongxian practiced the 1,000 Cloudy Sword scripture and was good at seizing qi. He was good at sensing profound qi. He examined the aura that he had captured just now and said, "This demon's origin essence qi is similar to that of an elephant realm cultivator. Its lifespan should be around 6 to 7,000 years. Wen Qingxiang thought for a while and said, "The qi of blood is wide and scattered, not strong. This demon's body seems to have never been tempered. Looking at it this way, it is hard to compare with the body of a celestial demon. This is probably the reason. This demon doesn't want to expose its true form in front of others." Tao Zhenhong said, "Everything has its ups and downs. Just now, the scarlet ape is called the fierce golden ape. It was difficult for external objects to injure him. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have been swallowed by a tyrannical monster, but he should have persisted for a few moments. However, on the diagram, a wisp of his soul had already dispersed. It was obvious that in that instant, his soul had been destroyed. Of course, it was due to his innate abilities, but it was still unknown how big his appetite was. The two of you should be careful later. Ning Chongxian and Wen Qingxiang both nodded. This was the first battle for the cultivators of the 9 continents after entering the mountain and sea realm. There was no room for mistakes, so they had to be cautious. Tao Xinren took out the Nanhua Master Spirit Bird's chart. Originally, he had been unable to use it. Later, he found the secret cultivation method of the sect leader in the Nanhua sect. Just now, he could open it. He waved his hand, and in one breath, he released over 1,000 spirit birds. However, there were only 3 types of birds. One was called the Great Heron. It was huge, and when it spread its wings, it could blot out mountains. The second type was called the Green Goose, and it was good at fighting in groups. The last type was small and exquisite. It was only the size of a finger, and it was called the Subtle Bird. It flew as fast as lightning. As the spirit birds charged down, a rumbling sound could be heard as the huge mouth once again appeared in the valley below. This time, it wasn't just one, but hundreds of them. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the birds had been swallowed, including the 12 great herons. The next moment, the huge mouth appeared again, and swallowed 90% of the remaining birds. Only a few managed to escape, and most of them were subtle birds. Ning Chongxian said coldly, "Just now, in one breath, the demon has unleashed a total of 638 mouths. Some of them are extremely powerful, even more powerful than the first attack. However, by doing so, its essence qi has been greatly reduced. If it could have dealt with all of its problems in one breath, it wouldn't have needed to attack a second time. This number is not its limit, but it's not far from it." Wen Qingxiang sensed for a while and said, "The demon's qi of blood has increased slightly. Obviously, swallowing the spirit birds is beneficial to it. It seems that the more prey it swallows, the more benefits it will gain." Tao Zhenhong pondered for a while and said, "After the subtle birds left the valley, the demons stopped pursuing them. Its supernatural power is about 1,000 miles in radius. It is not easy to move its body, and to reduce the consumption of spiritual vigor, it is limited to this valley. It is unwilling to leave this place. In this case, I can attack it from afar, and see how it responds." The 3 of them only probed twice, and they understood the strengths and weaknesses of the ancient demon. However, to be cautious, they tried a few more times, and they realized that the demon only had one supernatural power. Even though the power of this supernatural power was not weak, the method was too simple. After knowing its effect, it was not difficult to find a way to counter it. Based on the current situation, if it did not hide anything else, then it would not be too difficult to deal with it. After a few more words of discussion, the 3 of them decided to attack. The 3 clear qi separated, and each of them stood in a position, and attacked with mana. In the valley, rocks flew, cliffs collapsed, and mountains collapsed. The devouring cloud sage seemed to be enraged, and his whole body drilled out from the ground. He was 3,000 feet long, and he looked like a long worm. He had no ears or eyes, and there were only big mouths full of sharp teeth. There were countless fluttering whiskers and hairs, and he looked extremely hideous. The mana and supernatural power of the 3 of them went over, but they were swallowed by the big mouths on his body. Ning Chongxian was keenly aware that the qi of primordial qi in his body was constantly weakening, and it was obvious that it was not without damage. After the devouring cloud sage came out, it seemed that Tao Zhenren was the one who started the probing, so he rushed toward him first. Just now, when he was within 1,000 miles, a big mouth appeared where he was standing, and then swallowed him. Just a moment later, Tao Zhenren's figure appeared in the distance again, without any damage. Since he knew the ability of this demon, why would he test it with his own body? What was swallowed just now was merely a shadow clone that had transformed into a wisp of qi activity. However, the demon had not been able to distinguish the real from the fake, which surprised him. This meant that the intelligence of this demon was really not high. Ning Chongxian saw this scene and immediately changed his strategy. He pointed with his fingers, and hundreds of sword lights slashed down. However, some of them were fake, and less than 1/5 of them could really be used to hurt the enemy. As expected, the demon did not distinguish and released hundreds of sharp mouths, swallowing all the attacking sword chi. When Qingxiang smiled and waved his sleeve, and the blood threads in the sky closed, turning into thick blood arrows that shot down. He had just tested that after the big mouth swallowed the first thing, it would need to wait for a moment to come out and show its power. This was a huge flaw. As the blood arrows fell, they immediately melted holes in the body of the swallowing cloud sage. All the big mouths let out a shrill scream, and immediately gave up on Tao Jinren, and turned to rush toward Wen Qingxiang. At the same time, the wounds on his body were slowly healing. The three of them did not care. Not to mention the celestial demon, the strength cultivators in the 9 continents also had this ability, and to deal with this kind of demon, they only needed to slowly take away the essence of its vitality, and when the oil lamp ran out, it would not be difficult to subdue it. When Qingxiang had been waiting for the demon since it came over. He had always been meticulous, and at this moment, he saw that the demon seemed to be a little slow in moving, which was very different from just now. He could not help but feel a little strange. He knew that his attack just now was not enough to cause serious damage to it, so after a little observation, he found the reason, and thought to himself, so this demon does not rely on spiritual vigor to identify the enemy, but on the hair on its body. At this time, the swallowing cloud sage saw that he could not close the distance between the opponent, and suddenly disappeared from his original place. Then, a big mouth appeared in midair, and his body jumped out from it. But in the eyes of the three, it was more like the demon had spat him out. This kind of movement was very sudden, and if they were not prepared, they might fall into the trap. Wen Qingxiang was very careful. Even though he had a great advantage in the battle, he did not have any carelessness. His body swayed, and he turned into a bloodlight to escape. Seeing that the opponent had escaped, the swallowing cloud sage seemed to be anxious, and once again opened a big mouth in midair. In an instant, there was a huge suction force, and it sucked the blood light into his mouth and swallowed it. Ning Chongxian and Tao Jinren's expressions did not change. The people of Ling sect were good at the death substitution technique. If they could kill Wen Qingxiang so easily, it would be a joke. The swallowing cloud sage, on the other hand, became a little tired at this moment. It seemed that just now had consumed a lot of yuan qi. Ning Chongxian sensed that the essence of his yuan qi had been reduced by 30 to 40%. Of course, he would not let go of this opportunity. With a wave of his hand, thousands of sword qi slashed down again. As long as the sword qi hit the demon's body or collided with its aura, it would cut off a stream of qi and return it to the sword qi. When he fought with others, if the opponent was entangled in a head-on fight and did not know how to resolve it, it would only make him stronger as the battle went on. Naturally, Jinren Tao and Wen Qingxiang would not stand idly by either. They had completely seen through the demon's abilities. Every time they attacked, it was aimed at its weakness. There was no suspense in the battle. Less than 2 hours later, the three of them had exhausted the swallowing cloud sage to death, and Ning Chongxian collected its body, ready to see if it could be used to refine a magic weapon. He didn't use much strength in this battle, and he didn't use any magic treasures. This wasn't to say that the ancient demon was too weak. On the contrary, its spells were very powerful. However, the key was that it only knew how to use the spells it was born with and didn't know any tactics. On the other hand, the sky demons of the 9 continents were very different. Not only were they all fierce and cunning, but they also learned from others, and even refined magic weapons for their own use. But this was only the first ancient demon they had encountered. Whether the others were the same, they still needed to find a way to verify, and could not jump to conclusions. After the three of them adjusted their breathing in the same place, they discussed a few words with each other, and then took off to search for the next ancient demon. Chapter 1237. Zhang Yan sat on a prayer mat, looking up at the stars in the sky. This part of the world was very different from the 9 continents, and the number of years was also different. He could clearly sense that one day in this realm was equivalent to 2 days in the 9 continents. And yet, every day, his lifespan was reduced exactly the same as before. In other words, if you ignored the number of years that had passed on the surface, then your lifespan would be doubled. He shifted his gaze and looked in the direction of the great sun. Before, the sun and moon revolved around the 9 continents. But things were different in this place. The light of the sun and moon was constantly illuminated by different stars. Because they moved forward and backward, and were almost joined together. Therefore, to the people on the ground, it looked like the sun was rising from the east and setting in the west, going back and forth. In truth, it was nothing more than an illusory image. The sun that appeared in the next moment was not the sun that appeared in the previous moment. After the 24 hours passed, the sky above the mountain and sea realm was covered by a barrier of air, and the sun transformed into a moon. The reason for this was that the mountain and sea realm was like any living creature. It also breathed in and out, and when it breathed in, it lit up the sky. When it exhaled, it darkened the sky. Thus, day and night were separated. Seeing this, Meng Hao couldn't help but understand. At this time, Jingyu carefully walked over. He bowed and said, "Master, just now a disciple sent a message saying that there's a person flying in the sky and heading towards me. It looks like he's a native cultivator. Should we call someone to stop him?" A native cultivator? Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "There's no need to stop him. If he comes to my place, ask Meng Zhen to entertain him." Jingyu nodded, then left to pass on the message. Thousands of miles away, a large green eagle with a body of more than 1,000 feet flew over. The eagle's neck was covered with a loose lock, and there were long thorns strung on it. On its back, there were 5 people pulling the ropes from behind. If it deviated from its course, if it strayed off course, the eagle would feel some pain, and then it would be pulled back. The eagle's back was wide enough for 100 people to sit on. At the most flat area, there was a canopy. Mo Du was sitting under it. Behind him, there were dozens of solemn-looking armored guards. Among them was a young man of 17 or 18 years old. His expression and attitude were completely different from the others. His eyes were filled with excitement and expectation, but also a little uneasy. This was Gongzi Kuang's younger brother, Gongzi Huai. This time, it was necessary to bring someone from the Duke clan, so he was also sent along. Squatting on the eagle's head was a dwarf with huge eyes. At this moment, he pointed upwards and said, "Grand Palace Master, it's right in front. We just need to cross that fog barrier." Mo Du raised his head and looked. Above him was a ball of thick fog that was boundless and boundless. It was definitely not formed naturally by the heaven and earth. It should have been set up by someone from beyond the heavens. He thought that with the ability of the people from outer space, it would be impossible for them to not discover them. Now that they did not come out to stop them, it was obvious that they had tacitly approved of their arrival. With a stern voice, he said, "Later, no matter what happens, without my permission, none of you are to act rashly." The attendants behind him all acknowledged the order. Mo Du raised his hand, and the person riding the eagle in front understood. With a pull of the rope, the great green eagle let out a shrill cry and flew straight up into the clouds. Everyone held their breaths. After they passed through the clouds, the scenery in front of them suddenly changed. Auspicious lights and auspicious air were everywhere. Flying peaks and floating islands were scattered in the vast heaven and earth. From afar, they could see people in feathered robes and star crowns walking in the air. There were even flying boats and spiritual birds flying across the sky and circling around the peaks. On those hanging mountains, the fog was faintly discernible. There were waterfalls and springs everywhere, and countless palaces and halls were erected on them. Between the green branches and trees, one could vaguely see the curved eaves, golden bells and bronze beasts. Everything here, no matter if it was the clothes, accessories, halls, or mountains, they were all gorgeous and exquisite, and it was greatly different from the scene in the eastern wilderness that was filled with a savage aura. Everyone on the back of the eagle was stunned when they suddenly saw this scene. Gongzi Huai, on the other hand, was very excited, and his eyes lit up. Beneath Mo-Du's feet was a vast sea of clouds that rolled and floated, spreading to the end of the sky. He could no longer see any part of Eastern Baron, as if he was in another world. And to hang an island in the sky, not to mention that the 4 great academies of Shinfang country did not have the ability to do so, even Eastern Baron country could not do it. In the records of the God Nation, there might be a few words about it, but he dared to conclude that even back then, there were definitely not many of such things. Just from this point, it could be seen that the supernatural ability of the people from outer space was far superior to the countries of Eastern Baron. His gaze fell on those cultivators, and he thought, looking at those people's bearing and demeanor, they are very different from us mystic cultivators. They must have taken a different path of mystic cultivation. However, the flying object under their feet is indeed a powerful weapon of the country, and it looks like an ordinary object. If I can use it, it will definitely increase the national power of Shinfang country. Although there were eagles that could be ridden in the vassal states, these birds were not easy to catch, and they still needed to be specially controlled and looked after by servants. Moreover, their daily food consumption was also a huge amount. It was still okay if they were slightly smaller in size, but only the families of nobles could afford to keep them, and it was difficult to have a certain number of them. However, if there were thousands of such flying boats, the mystic cultivators in the country could go thousands of miles away at any time. Not only could they connect the 4 directions, they could also send troops to a city at any time to deter the other countries. He secretly made up his mind that no matter what price he had to pay, he must find a way to get his hands on this object. At this moment, a little kingfisher flapped its wings and flew over. After circling around everyone, it suddenly turned into a little girl with fair makeup. She clasped her hands behind her back, stood on her tiptoes, and looked up to ask, "Where did you come from?" Everyone's expression tensed up. Spirit demon. In the Eastern Barren Land, demons that could change between human and demon forms were all called spirit demons. These kinds of demons were mostly descendants of the ancient demon saints. Master Gongzi Huai took a step forward and bowed to her, saying, "This lady is very polite." He used the national accent of the Eastern Barren country. After all, the heavenly nation had unified the human path in the past. Whenever there was an alliance between countries, or when the monarchs and ministers of 2 countries talked, they still used this as the official accent. However, the little girl that the kingfisher transformed into did not understand his words. She hummed and tilted her head to think for a moment. Then, her eyes brightened, and she stretched out her hands. It was a green willow leaf. After Master Gongzi Huai took it, he saw that the little girl held it up with both hands and made a small biting gesture. He understood what she meant, looked at the willow leaf, and sent it into her mouth. "Master!" The servants at the side were shocked, and wanted to go forward to stop him. However, Master Gongzi Huai waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. He loosened the leaf into his mouth, and when it reached his tongue, he felt it turn into a clear air that seeped into his brain. Instantly, he felt some mysterious changes in his body. The little girl looked at him without blinking, and said, "Did you understand what I said?" Master Gongzi Huai nodded, and the little girl was very happy. She started to talk with him, but after a few sentences, they suddenly heard a long whistle in the sky, as if someone was calling the little girl. So, she waved at Master Gongzi Huai, and turned into a kingfisher again, flapping her wings and flying away. Mo-Du was just now watching, and did not come out to stop her. Only now did he call Master Gongzi Huai over, and asked, how did Master understand the words of the little girl? Master Gongzi Huai thought for a moment, and said, "It wasn't that I understood her words, but with the help of the willow leaf, my mind and the little girl's thoughts are connected. Even without spoken words, I could understand her meaning." Mo-Du couldn't help but nod, and he thought to himself, there are many tribes of savages in the forests in the southwest of Shinfang country, but they don't understand the language, and it's hard to recruit them. If we can obtain this method, we can greatly increase the population. He asked again, "Did you ask about the origins of those people from beyond the sky?" Master Gongzi Huai shook his head regretfully, and said, "Just now, I only know that the spirit bird is called Shi Chui, and she said that she came from a sect called Bai Yu Xian, and is a spirit bird under an elder in the sect." He added at the end, "Huai privately guessed that the so-called sect might be like my school, and that the elder might be someone like Master Gong." Mo Du made a sound of acknowledgement. Although the specific situation might not be so simple, he could get a rough understanding from this. Right at this moment, he heard a long and drawn-out cry. He turned around to look and saw a clear light shooting over. Its speed was so swift that it flashed like a bolt of lightning, and many people hadn't even reacted when it had already arrived nearby. The light dispersed, and a beautiful lady with her hair tied up in a bun and a long belt around her waist came out. She bowed to everyone, and said, "Honorable guest, please forgive me for not coming out to greet you." Although Mo Du couldn't understand her words, he could understand the meaning behind them. He put his hands together, and sent them forward, and returned the greeting. The lady stretched out her jade wrist, and took out a jade scroll, and sent it forward gently. Mo Du had a change of mind, and with a wave of his hand, a crystal-clear spirit bird appeared in the sky, and grabbed the jade scroll, and sent it over. When he held it in his hand, he touched it, and a clear light rose. Rows and rows of words floated past his eyes, and there was even a sound of chanting beside his ears. He immediately knew that this must be the language used by the people from outer space. In fact, he was not unprepared for this trip, and he brought along a talking bird. This bird was born with the ability to understand sentimental and spiritual sounds, and it could be used as a translator. However, the other party sent this item, and it was obvious that they had the intention of testing him. As the Grand Palace Master of Shenfang country, he naturally couldn't show weakness and bring down the country's prestige. At the end of the day, he was a great mystic cultivator. Having cultivated to this stage, mere words and phrases were not difficult for him at all. After reading it once, he was already familiar with it. He nodded at the woman and said, "Thank you." The lady smiled, and bowed again, and said, "Meng Zhen is already waiting in front. Honorable guests, please follow me." As she spoke, she rode the light and led the way in front. Mo Du gestured for them to follow, and the big green eagle followed behind them. After traveling for more than 1,000 miles, the misty clouds dispersed, and a huge floating continent appeared in front of them. Just now, those flying peaks and floating islands were like tiny insects compared to it. A man in his 40s with a light beard and long robe stood on a floating tower to welcome them. His body was filled with a vast clear air, and in the light above his head, there were waves rolling. His aura seemed to come from afar, but also seemed to be nearby. Seeing the arrival of the crowd, his gaze turned, and landed on Mo Du. He bowed, and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Mo Du chewed on the word, fellow Taoist, and only felt that it was lingering in his memory. His expression turned serious, and he bowed solemnly, and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Chapter 1238. After greeting each other in front of the pavilion, both parties greeted each other by name. Meng Zhen then welcomed Mo Du into the pavilion. As the vice-envoy, Gongzi Huai followed beside him. As for the rest of them, there were disciples who came to arrange a place for them to stay. Just now, when the three of them stepped into the pavilion, a voice came from outside. "I heard that senior apprentice brother is entertaining a guest, so I wanted to see the elegance of the cultivators of this world." Mo Du turned his head and saw a young man with a golden hairstyle walking in. His aura was unusually grand. He guessed that this was a very important figure among the people from outer space. Meng Zhen said, "Fellow Taoist Mo, this is my junior apprentice brother, Sun Jian." Mo Du put his hands together and bowed. "Fellow Taoist Sunday, Sun Jian came here because he was interested in the mystic cultivators of this world." In his eyes, although Mo Du's qi was not strong, it was already above the Yuanian cultivators. Even if it was not as strong as the Xiangxiang cultivators, it was not too far off. Moreover, Mo Du seemed to be able to resonate with the heaven and earth here. He guessed that Mo Du had some extraordinary skills, so he raised his hands and bowed. At this moment, Gongzi Huai swayed slightly. His face was pale and he was sweating profusely. In the past, he often came into contact with the great mystic cultivators, but they were different from the ancient demons. When they did not use their supernatural powers, they were no different from ordinary people. Just now, Mengjin also purposely kept his qi dynamic, so he did not feel anything. However, he did not expect that the spirit tide on Sun Jinren was so vast. It was like a huge wave surging towards him, and the pressure almost made him lose his balance. If he was not a spirit form mystic cultivator, he would have already collapsed to the ground. Sun Jinren saw it and immediately knew what was going on, so he kept his qi dynamic. Only then did Gongzi Huai recover, and he bowed deeply, "Please forgive me for my lack of manners." Mengjin thought for a while, and took out an item from his sleeve. He said, "I have a heart-guarding dragon tiger jade here. It can help to strengthen one's qi and not be tainted by external evils. Today, I will give it to you." Gongzi Huai took a look at Mo Du, and the latter nodded. He straightened his robe and hat and walked forward. He thanked her and accepted it. As soon as the jade was in his hand, he felt full of energy. His breathing was smooth, his ears were clear, and his eyes were clear. It was as if his feet had roots. Just now, that uncomfortable feeling had been completely swept away. He knew that this must be a treasure, so he took out a flat pouch embroidered with ghost runes and divine diagrams, and took out a dragon-headed golden seal that looked like a seal. He held it up with both hands and bowed as he presented it to Miao Yi, saying, "I also ask Master to accept this item." Mengjin nodded, and a child beside him stepped forward to receive it. Sun Jinren looked at the pouch with interest and said, "Can you let I take a look at this Qiankuan pouch?" Young Master Huai was slightly startled, and hurriedly said, "Why not?" Sun Jinren focused his gaze. The pouch flew in front of him, and after a few glances, he said, "This item is a complete whole. Even though it has been decorated, it still has fur patterns. It must have been taken from a living creature, and not refined by human hands." Young Master Huai couldn't help but be impressed. "Master is very accurate. This pouch was taken from a type of Yugen beast, and then refined by a craftsman. If Master likes it, I can send a few over." This Yugen was not easy to catch, and they were rare, so this pouch could only be carried by great mystic masters like Mo Du or nobles. This was not like the 9 continents, where only the lower generation cultivators could use the Qiankuan sleeve pouch. Sun Jinren could see that the refining that young Master Huai mentioned was just to decorate the outside with patterns, and it looked more exquisite, but there wasn't much change on the inside. From this, it could be deduced that the path of refining existed in this world, but it was very rough, and had yet to reach a higher level. After talking for a while, they became more familiar with each other, and gradually turned to the main topic. Mo Du said, "Pardon me for asking, but I wonder where are you all from?" This trip was nothing more than to find out where these people from beyond the heavens came from, and what they wanted to do. Only by understanding these 2 points, would there be a possibility of continuing the discussion. Mengjin didn't hide anything, and said, "The place we were originally at is called the 9 continents, but this world has been opened for billions of years, and the spiritual vigor has long declined, so my sect leader led the cultivators of various sects to your honorable place." At this point, he bowed. "What we seek is to spread our teachings in this world, to establish a sect, and to continue our sect's teachings." "I see." Mo Du didn't find it hard to understand. Even if it was the Shinfang Country Middle School, they could only pass on the wisdom of their predecessors through endless inheritance. As for whether what the other said was true or false, they could slowly find out in the future, and there was no need to get to the bottom of it now. He thought for a while, and said, "I'm afraid it won't be easy for your side to establish a sect in the eastern wastelands. On this land, most of the lands are already occupied by the demons. Since the collapse of the eastern wastelands, the other countries can only stay in their corners, barely resisting the demons, and no longer have the strength to go out on expeditions to recover lost lands." Enlightened Master Sun sneered and said, "Over here, there is an ancient demon wreaking havoc, and in the land of my 9 continents, there is also a calamity like the heavenly demon. In the past, this generation was completely annihilated by the predecessors of our various sections. Later on, our sects were established on their corpses. In my opinion, today is merely repeating the actions of our predecessors. Young Master Huai was frightened when he heard this. Mo Du, however, remained calm. Since the other said this in front of him, then his target was the demons of the eastern wastelands, and this did not conflict with the original intention of coming here. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, in that case, the original eastern wastelands, thousands of years ago, was under the rule of your god kingdom. Mo Du said solemnly, exactly. Meng Zhen nodded, and did not continue speaking. This was the first time the two sides came into contact, and some things could be mentioned slowly, there was no need to rush, so they changed the topic to the path of cultivation. Although the cultivators of the 9 continents had previously obtained the Jade Scrolls, and knew a little about the path of cultivation in this world, they did not know the details. After listening to Mo Du's words, just now, they knew that the so-called mystic cultivator first used the method of strengthening vitality, taking external medicine, and conditioning one's internal organs, tendons, bones, essence, primordial spirit, and qi. This step could be said to involve both qi and strength. And when one's external yang and internal yin were both full, it was the realm of internal consolidation. This step, however, was to abandon the path of qi, and further strengthen the body, like filling up a pool of water. At the realm of opening aperture, one could use one's qi and blood to communicate with heaven and earth, and use all kinds of unpredictable methods. However, there were still many shortcomings in this realm, but they could be made up for through the path of talismans and external objects. At the realm of spirit image, mystic cultivators could use their qi and blood as a foundation, and use their consciousness to create a spirit image. Their battle power now was not comparable to before. However, this kind of cultivation method did not have any major barriers in each realm, and was very rough and blurry. Luckily, if a mystic cultivator's talent was not too bad, as long as they were willing to use external medicine, it was not difficult to push them to the realm of spirit image. But to go further, it was not so easy. Sun Jinren raised his eyebrows, and said, fellow Taoist Mo, you have already cultivated to the realm of opening mystic, I wonder if I have the honor to learn a thing or two from you? Mo Du also knew that if his side did not show enough strength, these cultivators did not need to bother with them, so he nodded and agreed. Sun Jinren was a person who did what he wanted to do, and he did not stand on ceremony. With a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a beam of light and flew out of the pavilion, flying up into the sky. Mo Du chanted a few words, and a black cloud appeared outside his body, wrapping around him, and he flew up as well. Meng Zhen waved his sleeve, and the pavilion around him instantly disappeared, no longer blocking their vision. Seeing such a method, young Master Huai could not help but be amazed. After Sun Jinren and Mo Du reached the top, they both stood still. Behind Sun Jinren, a ball of qi slowly appeared. Thunder rumbled, and heavy water bobbed up and down. Bolts of lightning flashed back and forth, and the aura was shocking. At the place where Mo Du was standing, blood qi slowly spread out. Then, it condensed and turned into a creature with 2 wings spread out, a tail and fins, a horn on its head, and teeth like swords. It looked like a bird and a fish, and it didn't look any different from a living creature. Meng Zhen looked at it and nodded, thinking, so this is the realm of opening mystic. It really can transform a human into a great demon, similar to the path of strength, but also different. At this moment, the two in the sky had already collided. Because it was not a battle of life and death, they were just testing each other's methods. Therefore, after fighting for a dozen rounds, they both stopped and descended from the sky. After Sun Jinren stood still, he said bluntly, fellow Taoist Mo's method is powerful, but it is not your own ability. In this world, it might be strong for a while, but in the virtual sky, it will be beaten back to its original state. He could see that Mo Du's ability was probably above that of a nascent body cultivator, but slightly weaker than Taoist Dong Tian. His divine arts and spells did not have many variations, but he had the ability to use the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth for his own use. Once he did so, he could unleash power that was a few times stronger than his own. Mo Du said, I do not seek immortality, I only seek for the longevity of the country. Both of them sought different things, so their paths of Tao were naturally different. No matter what the origin of the cultivation techniques of the 9 continents was, the ultimate goal was to break through the world and ascend, to seek for immortality. Therefore, all divine arts and spells came from oneself. Even if one went to a place without any spiritual vigor, one could still ensure that one's combat power would not be lost. Mystic cultivators were different. The reason why they cultivated was to defend against demons and spirits, so that they could reproduce and survive. Therefore, they only pursued the power of divine arts. As for the rest, as long as it was not beneficial to battle, they could give it up. Meng Zhen said, if fellow Taoist Mo can let go of worldly matters, you might be able to improve on the path of Tao. Mo Du shook his head and said, a country cannot be without a cultivator, and a cultivator cannot be without a country. The countries nurtured cultivators for them to serve the country. Since they received this favor, they had to bear this responsibility, and it was impossible for them to give it up. Moreover, once a mystic cultivator left their country, they would not be able to enjoy the offerings of the country, nor would they be able to cultivate. It was even more impossible for them to survive in the wasteland that was filled with demons and spirits. It could be said that the two depended on each other, and neither could be missing. At this moment, Sun Jinren said, may I ask, in the East Baron, how many great mystic cultivators are there like fellow Taoist Mo? Mo Du thought about it and felt that there was nothing to hide. Even if he did not say, the other party could find an answer elsewhere, so he said, in the East Baron countries, there are 6 big countries and 13 small countries. The rest are all weak countries, and each country needs at least 2 great mystic cultivators. Just now, we are considered big countries. East Baron country has 5 great mystic cultivators. In my Xinfang country, including me, there are 4. The remaining 4 countries each have 3 great mystic cultivators. Among the 100 countries, there are about 30 great mystic cultivators. On the surface, there are many, but the countries are scattered, and they have to face different tribes and races, so they are unable to unite. If a few ancient demons join forces and attack, the country will be in danger of being destroyed.